If you guys enjoy what I do, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps the channel and it's free and easy to do. Before we get started with today's video, I have an announcement to make. After years of telling other people's stories, I finally released one of my own. My novel Eternal Reign is available now in both ebook and paperback format for those of you who are like me and prefer to collect physical media. You can grab a copy right now on Amazon through the link in the description of this video. And now back to our regularly scheduled program. In Old Charlian, a woman named Nimjiji predicted where you would come, so she stood in the same spot waiting for you to pass by. Her calculations weren't all that good because she won't tell you exactly how long she had to stand there, but you're finally here. She works with Professor Claudian with the Atheoscope to observe the ethereal sea in an attempt to solve some of its mysteries. Recently they found a strange crystal, and they have no clue what it is. So they figured since you've been to everywhere from the center of the star to the edge of the universe, you may have some information that they don't. So you head to Aporia with her to see if you can help them solve this mystery. After getting introduced to Professor Claudian, he has to admit that he's a bit nervous meeting the first person to go into the ethereal sea and live to tell about it. While he hasn't done what you've done, Claudian has looked deeper into the ethereal sea than anyone else, and his knowledge is second to none. Aside from you, that is. But you were busy fighting during your trip to the underworld, so you didn't have that much time to learn all that much. Claudian and his group were the ones who used the Antitower to speak to Heidelin and learn about the final days. That was when they moved to Labyrinthos and used the Atheoscope to study even more of the ethereal sea, but they've only learned a small fraction of what it has to offer. During some of their studying, they found a weird crystal. Found isn't quite the right word. It popped up in front of them like someone had thrown it at them. The shape is strange, and the ether in it is extremely dense. It's not a natural creation of the planet. Someone made it. That's all they've figured out for now, which is why they've brought you in. It's a good thing they did, because the crystal is very familiar. It looks like the crystals the ancients used to store memories. Seeing that you do know about the crystal, Claudian wants you to tell him everything, which of course you do. Learning that the Ascians had used those crystals to put their memories into new vessels is fascinating to the professor, and even though he had known the crystal was special, he hadn't expected it to be something quite so interesting. Nimjiji points out the fact that there's been similar memory storing crystals appearing throughout history, from the soul crystals that people use to learn combat techniques to pieces of auracite, meaning they should test the ancient crystal against some of the more common ones just to see how different they actually are. It's a good idea, but Claudian is so lost in his thoughts about the crystal that he doesn't even hear her. While the crystal is similar to the ones you've seen, it doesn't have a symbol on it, so whose memories does it hold? Apparently the professor gets lost in his thoughts constantly, but it's a little rude to do that after you invite a guest over. Once the others manage to get his attention again, he decides to let you see if you can draw the memories out of the crystal. As soon as you touch it, you hear a distress message saying for anyone who hears the message to come to Pandemonium. Otherwise, the star will be in serious danger. Unfortunately, that's all it tells you. Pandemonium is not a name Claudian has heard before, but in the ancient language it means all demons, which doesn't make a distress call from a place like that something you really want to get. If another planet-level threat is on the way, then studying the crystal and drawing out the rest of the memories is a top priority. For the scientist, Claudian has a special assignment for you. He wants you to go and find the person who sent the message. Since the crystal is made by one of the ancients, and you've been to the past before, you can go again to try and find out what Pandemonium is. Yes, that's a spoiler from the MSQ, but you clicked on a video about the story of a post-MSQ raid. I shouldn't have to give you a spoiler warning since that's kinda self-explanatory. Since the Warrior of Light is in fact the only person who can make this trip, you take the crystal the scientists found and head back to the portal in the crystal tower that is linked to Elpis. As you get close, the crystal glows again and tells you to come to Pandemonium, quickly. So you step through the portal and slam headfirst into a young, white-robed ancient. When he sees you, he mistakes you for a close friend of his, but that could have been from the concussion you gave him. His friend told him that a falling star would appear before him, but he hadn't thought she meant that literally. His name is Themis, and the reason he's not actually wearing a mask is because he's not one of Elpis' observers. He's there on an assignment that had been pretty normal until you fell on him, which makes him wonder what brought you there, because you clearly don't belong there, or anywhere else for that matter. That's when you break out the lie that you've been telling to people since your first trip to Elpis, that you're Azim's very detailed familiar. Ironically enough, Themis's friend is a Zim, which means when he mistook you for her, he wasn't that far off, but he didn't know she had such a unique familiar. Themis assumes you were sent by a Zim, and because of that, he very accurately guesses that you're there to investigate Pandemonium, which means the two of you can work together, after you tell him how you got there. Once you explain, he apologizes for being so untrustworthy, but your arrival was a bit weird, and he's understanding enough to not pry too deeply into the things you're trying not to tell him, since everyone's entitled to their secrets. But he does want to see the crystal that you told him about. He can't tell you what specific memories are in the crystal, but they are there, and they say something bad is happening in Pandemonium. The place goes deep beneath Elpis, and is watched over by the words of La Habrea. It holds creations that are extremely important for research purposes, and extremely dangerous to the planet. It's heavily guarded and under constant surveillance, but a few days ago there was a strange shift in the ether around the place, and not long after that, all communication with Pandemonium vanished. Themis is there as a representative of a group that works with the Convocation of 14, and he's been sent to investigate. And since you're both going to Pandemonium, he thinks it'll be a good idea for both of you to head there together. Plus, that'll keep you from having to do something crazy like sneaking in. He had originally planned on doing his investigation with Azim. She had noticed the changes near Pandemonium, so it was only natural that the two of them would check it out together. But she figured it'd be a bad idea for both of them to go, since having two members of their organization poking around might make people ask questions. Themis decided to go alone, but Azim told him to fear not, for in my absence a star shall fall before you. He didn't expect that star to be a bunny woman, but he knew something would happen because Azim is usually right about that type of stuff. Either way, he's grateful to have you along. But first things first, you have to get permission from the words of La Habrea to go into Pandemonium, which means you have to talk to one of the speakers. Fortunately, one of them should be stationed nearby. Themis had already sent a request for entry, so with a little luck it shouldn't take long to get inside. The speaker grants the two of you permission pretty fast, although he's extremely interested in your strange etheric signature. He marks your ether so you'll be able to come and go into Pandemonium freely, but the creatures in the place are extremely dangerous, so the two of you have to follow what the warders tell you without question. Warder is just the title given to the people who work with the creatures in Pandemonium. Under normal circumstances, if a creation is labeled a threat to the star, it's immediately destroyed. But sometimes those creatures need to be studied before they're wiped out, so they're stored in Pandemonium. So the researchers there act as both scientists and prison wardens. The place is basically a dungeon for all things big and scary. The speaker doesn't know why the two of you are investigating Pandemonium, but he wants you to be quick so he can tell La Habrea if there is something he needs to deal with. The fact that the speaker hasn't realized that something is wrong is a little odd, but the changes in ether didn't bother La Habrea, and the warders haven't reported anything that would make him act, so as far as they're concerned, all is well. Themis didn't realize La Habrea paid so much attention to the place, but the speaker is more curious about your reaction to hearing La Habrea's name, and he wants to know if you know the man. There are quite a few stories you could tell him about La Habrea, none of them good, but the fact that you know him at all is a surprise to both of the ancients, and puts your status as a familiar into question. La Habrea isn't all that free with his time, so the fact that you know him makes you even more interesting. Regardless, the speaker warns you to not interfere with La Habrea's work. And with that, you and Themis head to the teleporter that will take you both to the prison of deadly beasts. Themis still can't believe that you've met La Habrea, but he's still trying his best to respect your secrets and not pry. But he thinks the two of you will know each other very well in time. If he's who I think he is, then he's very right about that, and that next meeting won't be nearly as friendly as this one. But that's a problem for another day. This is his first time going to Pandemonium too, and he's very eager to see what it's like. The place looks like something straight out of a haunted mansion from Castlevania, and the moment the two of you get there, Themis' fears are realized. Despite what the speaker said, things are very bad. Between all of the chains and magical wards, the place was made to be impenetrable, but someone is messing with the protections from the inside of it like it's trying to break out. But there's no immediate danger because Themis reinforced the barriers as soon as the two of you stepped into the place. It won't stop what's happening, but it will slow it down. Something really bad is going on there, and the fact that the place is so quiet is not making it feel any less creepy. Themis hadn't expected to see a lot of people, but you haven't even seen one warder, which means you need to find one. But of course, there's another problem. The magic Themis used to strengthen the wards needs his constant attention, so if a fight happens, he won't be able to join in. Otherwise, Pandemonium's protections will crumble. Let's be completely honest, both you and the Warrior of Light already knew that this was how things was going to turn out. Themis won't be completely useless when the fighting starts. He can use a bit of creation magic to make a total of 7 people to fight beside you. I wonder where that number came from. With the particulars sorted out, the two of you head deeper into Pandemonium to see what horrors are waiting for you. As the Warrior of Light and Themis head deeper into Pandemonium on their search for a warder, one comes running towards you, but he's clearly not in his right mind. The moment he sees you, he transforms into a much more intimidating form and gets ready to attack. If you want to talk to him, you'll have to knock him out first. Themis, true to his word, uses your ether to create 7 allies because that's the number you'll need for an 8-man raid, and you all face off against the rampaging warder. He wields some powerful abilities which makes sense considering the types of creatures he has to deal with, but he's nothing you can't handle, and you bring him down, forcing him to transform back. Themis was impressed by both your performance and the power of the people he summoned, but they were made from you, so it only made sense that they would be great fighters. All that's left is to wait for the warder to wake back up so Themis can find out what made him attack you like that. You must have hit him really hard because when he finally wakes up, it takes a moment for his memories to come back. When he first saw you, his mind was full of thoughts of desperation and anger, and he just lashed out. He's glad he hadn't come across someone weaker or they wouldn't have been able to stop him. He introduces himself as Erithonius, a warder of the highest layer of Pandemonium known as Asphodelos. He had really wanted to keep you out of the place because all of the creatures locked away in Asphodelos have been set free and are wandering around the halls hungry for blood, which is pretty bad, especially since this has never happened before. Each of Pandemonium's levels are controlled by a key ward who pays attention to even the smallest details in their area. The process they have to go through to get their job is super strict, and their loyalty to La Habrea is absolute. But for whatever reason, things have gotten out of hand. The warders have been trying to get the monsters back in place, but the fighting's so intense that Erithonius hadn't realized that he had got separated from the others. His senses had been flooded by a lot of whispers. Then the only thing he remembers is getting extremely angry, then nothing. Something had attacked him with magic, probably the same thing that had separated him from his allies, and if it wasn't for you and Themis, whatever had taken over him would still have him. He thinks that the fact that you're there means word of their situation has reached the outside world, so maybe you have a bit of good news for him, but telling the man that the protections of Pandemonium are being taken down from the inside is not quite the news he was hoping for. Those defenses are probably being taken down by the same people who set the monsters loose, but that's not exactly helpful information. A question comes to the warder's mind that he hadn't thought about before. What will Themis' organization do once they hear about what's happened at Pandemonium? The answer is pretty obvious. They would consider the place a lost cause, cut it off from the rest of the world, and destroy it. That's about what the warder had expected. If the creatures get out, there's no telling how much damage they will cause to the outside world. The words of La Habrea wouldn't want that to happen no matter what, which means Erithonius needs to save the other warders before that happens. He's willing to go alone because the others won't stop trying to detain the creatures, so they'll be fighting them until the place ends up destroyed by the convocation without ever having a chance to escape. The only thing Erithonius asks is that Themis gives him time to help the others before he tells the convocation, and maybe the place won't need to be destroyed by then. While his heart's in the right place, Themis knows that Erithonius doesn't have the power to fix this on his own, and all that would happen is he would die. But the two of you are supposed to investigate the place before he makes his report, and so far all you've done is study the front door, so the warder can tag along with the two of you for a while, which will give him a little bit of a better chance at survival. And of course you're willing to help because they'll be fighting, which makes Themis think of Azim and gives him hope that this will all turn out okay. So for the moment, the three of you will work together, which is good because now you have someone along who actually knows the halls of Pandemonium. At the gate, Erithonius doesn't hear any sound, which means none of the monsters or warders have made it to that point, which means he has a chance to save them both, because he doesn't want all of their work to be for nothing. Themis thinks that La Habrea would smile at seeing the devotion of his people, but Erithonius doesn't think the man's even capable of smiling. Apparently he's dealt with the man personally. Erithonius had been mentored by La Habrea's predecessor, the one who had run the facility before him. Her name was Athena, and she was the one who put him in his current position. Themis hadn't even known anyone had run Pandemonium before La Habrea, and it makes him realize that the Warder's desire to save the research subjects has more to do with preserving the work of his mentor than protecting the work of La Habrea. Unfortunately, he doesn't have a clue how to go about recapturing the specimens since he can't use internment magic, which of course you have no clue what type of magic he's talking about. Internment magic is similar to what he was trying to do to you during your battle, binding you in ethereal shackles, although only the key ward of each tier is permitted to use the true, much more powerful version of that spell. And even if he were allowed to do it, Erathonius doesn't have the power to use the spell. Themis knows a little about internment magic. From what he's heard, La Habrea came up with it, and while the shackles Erathonius used on you would hold you in place for a few minutes, internment can freeze the space around its target for as long as the caster wants. But what Themis knows is the equivalent of someone knowing that a baseball player hits a rock with a stick. He knows what they're supposed to do, but he has no idea how to actually do it. But he does have a whole lot of magical power, so by combining his ether with Erathonius' knowledge of the spell, they should be able to recapture the creatures. It'll be complicated, but it should be doable once you find one of the creatures, preferably one that's alone so if the spell doesn't work, the Warrior of Light can deal with the thing. The Warder remembers seeing a hippocampus wandering around the waterways alone, and it might still be there, so that could be a good place to start since most of the other creatures in Pandemonium aren't really that fond of water. That way you can get your one-on-one fight because the monster will need to be weakened before it can be captured. Think of it as a much more deadly game of Pokemon, where the ancients throw you out in combat risking your life while they stand back in safety, and once you win they can do the easy work of capturing the monster and acting like this was a whole team effort sort of thing. The first thing that I'm positive went through the Warrior of Light's mind when she saw the hippocampus coming toward her was who thought it was a good idea to make this thing. The head separates from the body and floats around and stuff, making this thing super creepy. It fits better in a Dark Souls game than here, but fortunately you have the people Themis manifests to help you fight, which gives you the edge you need to knock the beast unconscious, and when it falls the two ancients teleport in and seal the creature away. Erathonius is extremely impressed by how well you fought. It's not all that often that masters of combat come to Pandemonium, so getting to see a warrior of your caliber was great. And the fact that the plan worked makes it even better. Magic was never his thing, but with him channeling Themis' power, he actually felt like a proper mage. That sounds strange considering all the stuff he did to you in your fight, but shackles is the only magic he can do since he's been training with it since he was little. But he thinks with you all working together, you can save the place. Even though things are going well, the fact that you haven't seen any other warders has Themis worried. But Erathonius thinks it's likely that the key ward has already gathered up the other warders and retreated to a safe spot. Other than how strong they are, Themis doesn't really know anything about the key wards. The key ward of Asphodelos is named Hesperos. He knows a lot about the creatures under his charge, and he takes a lot of time to personally mentor the warders who work underneath him. He's helped Erathonius a lot, despite his magical deficiencies. He never panics, plans everything, and like the other key wards, he can use creation magic to bend the halls of Pandemonium itself to his will, which is why Erathonius is positive the other warders are safe, unless something's eaten the man. But with the power to change the environments, that's unlikely. The hippocampus wouldn't have been nearly as dangerous if you could have turned the room you fought in into a desert, so finding Hesperos should be top priority. The safest place in the area is the center, because if things get bad, the warders could retreat to Abyssos from there. So that's the best place to check, and if things look worse than he expected, that'll tell Themis whether or not he needs to check on Abyssos too. The problem is Erathonius can't change the hallways, and the path you have to take is blocked by the Phoenix. Don't know why they spelled Phoenix that way, but it's still an immortal firebird with very strong healing powers, so it's something that won't be all that fun to fight. Especially since it's one of La Habrea's personal creations that didn't turn out quite right. Instead of being a peaceful, helpful bird like you would expect a phoenix to be, this one is crazy and just wants to burn stuff. That might be why they misspelled the name, to show that this one was almost right but not quite. A lot of other ancients had tried to make the perfect phoenix, but they failed over and over again, so they gave up. All but La Habrea, and he eventually succeeded. There was more to the Phoenix story and what happened to it after it was brought to life in Tales from the Shadows number 4, which I covered on the channel and will link in the card at the end of the video so you guys can check it out. While making the Phoenix was a big accomplishment, the researchers of Pandemonium didn't even make a note of it, let alone celebrate. The only time the work of the words of La Habrea really affects them is when something they make has to be locked away. But thinking about the past is pointless when you have things to do, and it's very likely you're about to have to fight one of the most savage creatures in Asphodelos. But at least you're fighting it in a building instead of somewhere where its powers can really shine, so it's best to get to it. Sure enough, the three of you spot the Phoenix flying around outside, but the minute you see it, Hesperos, wearing his best Dracula cosplay, changes the area to a place filled with flame that will definitely make the Phoenix stronger. Before it can attack you, the ancients teleport the three of you away. Erythonius doesn't understand why Hesperos would do that, but Themis thinks it'll be better to worry about that after you all deal with the Phoenix, because fighting it in the new environment is going to be super difficult. And it really is. I hate everything about this fight against the most horrifying Hydra-Phoenix hybrid I have ever seen. But after lots of flame and death, the bird is brought down and sealed away. With that done, it's time to worry about why Hesperos tried to have you killed, but the ancient shows up so you can ask him yourself. He had expected the bird to delay you, but it was weaker than he thought. Hesperos' personality doesn't seem anything like what Erythonius said it was. The man insults the water's intelligence in every way he can, so either something's taken over him, or he was secretly a jerk all along and he's just not hiding it anymore. But he does reveal one very interesting tidbit of information in the midst of his insults. Erythonius is La Habrea's son. The fact that the son of the man he respects is so weak seems to really get on Hesperos' nerves, especially considering what he has managed to do in service to La Habrea. He's merged with one of the mythic creatures and has nearly made himself into a god. He attempts to use interment on the three of you, but Themis has mastered the spell in the short time since you've been in Pandemonium, and he breaks out of it. Since you have no idea what this vampire impersonator can do, the three of you retreat. While Hesperos does think you're all weak, he is impressed by how you overpowered the Phoenix and how Themis mastered interment so fast. But either way, he's confident that if you come after him trying to interfere with his work, you'll die. But he knows you're going to come, and he's waiting for it, because even though Erythonius is weak, Hesperos still has a use for him. Themis had suspected that you'd have to fight the Key Ward, and he's not looking forward to it. But at the moment, he's more worried about Erythonius. Having someone you respect and admire treat you like crap is a crushing experience, and Themis hopes that doesn't break the man, especially since you don't really have the time to let him process things. La Habrea had made the protection wards around Pandemonium, and the ability to bind things is the only thing Erythonius has in common with his father. Themis had already suspected that the two of them were related once the man had said that he had practiced the binding magic since he was little. La Habrea had taught him to cast that spell, but he was mostly taught by his mother Athena, La Habrea's predecessor. She had brought her son to Pandemonium. La Habrea hadn't had anything to do with that. It wasn't until after his mother had died that La Habrea took her place, and the fact that he didn't even seem to care that Athena was gone is one of the main reasons why Erythonius hates him. Even though Themis doesn't know La Habrea personally, the little bit that he has seen of the man gave him the impression that he was a little cold-hearted. This isn't a conversation that the warder is all that interested in keeping going, so Themis changes the subject to something that's equally uncomfortable. What to do about Hesperos. The other warders are probably prisoners somewhere, so they definitely won't be able to help. And Hesperos is expecting you, so he's going to have all of the advantages, which means you don't need to give him more time to prepare. Instead of going after any more of the loose monsters, you're going to take the fight straight to the Key Ward, but that doesn't mean you know how to beat him. However, since Hesperos claims that he became one with one of the creatures, he may be vulnerable to the interment spell. Themis doesn't think locking the man up is a good enough punishment for his crimes, but Erythonius wants to know why the man turned on them. The man claims he's helping La Habrea, but destroying his work doesn't really make sense, so Erythonius really needs some answers. Themis is curious too, and so are you. Plus, if locking him up doesn't work, you can always finish him off. The warder did notice that Hesperos had the fangs of a Vrikolakis, a beast that feeds off of ether, and that's likely what Hesperos fused with. So he's a literal ether vampire, and he can change the environment, so the fight is going to be rough. But what else is new? So it's off to fight Dracula Jr. you all go. The Key Ward constantly changes the arena, making for a very painful experience. But after a lot of blood and death, and I mean a lot of blood and death, you bring him down. Themis and Erythonius try to bind him, but of course he breaks free. I don't know why they thought they could bind him with the same spell Themis learned how to break after only a few hours, but they did, and it didn't work. Hesperos admits that he shouldn't have underestimated the three of you, but even though he lost, he has no intention of giving you the answers you want, and instead of letting Themis interrogate him, he impales himself on his own sword and dies, leaving Erythonius to wonder why he would do all of this when he had everything he could have possibly wanted. It could have been something as simple as his own desire to impress his master, pushing him to take bigger and bigger risks until he just did something stupid to get attention. Which that's something Erythonius can understand, but now it's time to find the other warders and get Asphodelos back under control. Fortunately, with Hesperos' death, it's the perfect moment for Themis to take control of the place, but when he reaches out with his ether to do just that, he senses something from the next level of Pandemonium, a place called Abyssos, and whatever it is puts up a ward blocking you from going further. Instead of trying to break through the ward, Themis decides to head back to the entrance so he can get a better view of what's happening. But one thing is for certain, your investigation isn't over because Hesperos clearly wasn't behind what's going on in Pandemonium. The same magic that had affected Erythonius and made him attack you could have also caused the changes in Hesperos that led him to merging with one of the creations, which means you're probably going to see more warders merge with monsters in the not too distant future. But the fact that Hesperos attacked you alone could mean that it takes a while to make these hybrids, so there's still a chance to save the others, once Themis finds a way through the ward. And since Themis did manage to take control of Asphodelos, he can lock up the remaining creatures without too many problems, but since Erythonius is the only warder left on the floor, he'll need his help to keep them locked in place. This whole thing is a lot more complicated than Themis had planned, but he still won't tell anyone outside what's going on until after the other warders are found, and he finds out what took them. But if worse comes to worse, Erythonius is willing to ask his father for help. For now, the two ancients think you should take a break. They won't need you to fight anymore on this floor, but when the two of them break through to Abyssos, we all know what's going to happen. Not to mention you need to tell Claudian and the others what happened. After what you tell them, they're surprised that you aren't dead, but they're new to dealing with you, so their ignorance about your plot armor can be forgiven. However, you still haven't found out who created the crystal that drew you to Pandemonium in the first place, which means neither of your investigations are over, and there's no telling what you'll find by the time this all comes to an end. It's been a while since the Warrior of Light checked in with Claudian and the others at Labyrinthos, and the man, after a lot of sleepless nights, has apparently made a breakthrough, one that he's so eager to talk about that he'll likely miss some important bits, so his assistant Nemgigi calms him down so he can focus. Once she does, instead of picking up where you left off, he decides to give you a full recap of the entire Pandemonium mission, including the parts that you were there for. One thing you can count on a scientist to do is take a long time getting to the point. After you had come back from Pandemonium, Claudian and his people had spent a lot of time trying to figure out the nature of the crystal that they had found. He had detected an odd ether signature from it that he thinks came from the memories that were stored inside of it. The ether seems to want to be made complete, and after studying it a bit more, he discovered an identical signature coming from somewhere else, meaning there's a matching crystal somewhere in your time. And Claudian plans on going to find it. He doesn't think it'll be hard to find, so he's going to take the trip alone while you go back to Pandemonium to see what other secrets you can find. From what he's guessed, the time travel from the Crystal Tower doesn't let you pick when you appear, so time should be moving forward at a regular pace on Elpis, meaning you should check in with Themis and Erythonius at regular intervals. Claudian's assistants don't want the man to head off alone, but he's already hired a ship and pilot, so there's really no way to talk him out of it, and he decides to head off before they can try anymore. Nemgigi's been worried about him because he's been a little more absent-minded than usual, not to mention the fact that he seems to be the only one that can sense the crystal's ether. That alone has him thinking that he can solve this mystery by himself. He's making his colleagues feel useless, but they hope he'll be back to normal after his little adventure. Regardless, the Warrior of Light needs to get back to Pandemonium, and since you have to pass through Elpis to get there, Nemgigi wants you to do something for her. She wants you to find out more about the creatures in Pandemonium. She wants to know their whole story, like what made them get locked away in the first place. She knows that the ancients kept good records, and that bit of information might help you be at least a little more prepared if you have to fight again. Since the Warrior of Light usually takes the shoot first and shoot again later approach to problem solving, this may make for a good change of pace. Back in Elpis, when you go to check on the records, it turns out that Themis was in the process of doing the same thing. And he's already gotten all the information, which saves you from having to do something as annoying as research. He had taken down the warding seals blocking your way into Abyssos, and he had decided to play a hunch while he waited for you to come back. The wards in Pandemonium have still been under regular attack by your unseen enemy, but there's been no major attacks that Themis doesn't think that Erythonius can handle without him. He's been working hard at mastering the interment spell so he can lock up the creatures without Themis' help, so he was giving the man time to practice. Themis plans on giving him a bit more time because he has one more thing that he wants to look into, and he wants you to come with him. He had been wondering why every one of the warders in Pandemonium either really hated or really loved La Habrea. Hesperos was totally devoted to the man, and Erythonius hates him with a passion. That doesn't sound all that strange to you, but among the ancients that level of extreme emotion is rare, even among family members. Themis is grateful to his own parents for what they did for him, but there are no strong feelings between them. They all see each other as equals, and that's how most of the ancients see everyone else. The researchers of Pandemonium seem outright obsessed with La Habrea in a way that seems unnatural. That's not the only thing he found weird, so he decided to just ask a member of the Words of La Habrea about it. The first thing he wants to know is why Pandemonium was built under Elpis in the first place, since the governing body doesn't really have any say in its day-to-day operations. Themis had thought that it was so Elpis' faulty creatures could be easily sent over there, but it turns out that most of Pandemonium's specimens don't even come from there. They're sent from all over. Even the Words of La Habrea have sent over a few. So it would make more sense, at least to Themis, if Pandemonium had been built near the Academia at Niter. The speaker from the Words of La Habrea doesn't seem to have a problem answering Themis' questions, especially since some of their members have asked the same thing a time or two. Pandemonium's not exactly something that you can just hook a chain to and drag somewhere else, and until recently, at least recently in the minds of the immortals, most of the creations in Pandemonium had come from Elpis. After time, some creations that weren't even seen as fit to send to Elpis caught the eye of Pandemonium's researchers and they had them sent over. That seems to go against the original purposes of the place, so Themis wants to know who decides what creatures to study. Turns out that those decisions come directly from La Habrea himself, which means if somebody is doing some inappropriate experiments in Pandemonium, it would have to be under La Habrea's orders. That sounds like an accusation which doesn't go over well with the speaker. La Habrea wouldn't abuse his power, and if by some miracle he decided to try to, the other key wards do have enough authority to stop him from doing that. But none of that is possible, since the Words of La Habrea recently got a report straight from Pandemonium that everything was fine. Since you and Themis both know that's a lie, that means one of the key wards is working with whoever is causing the problem, something that Themis waits to say until after the speaker leaves. The two of you decide that it's best to get back to Pandemonium, because if there's another rogue key ward, then leaving Erythonius alone may not be as safe as Themis had thought. The warder is practicing the interment spell, but even though he's been working non-stop on the technique, he still can't do it properly, and time is running out. It's running out faster than he thinks, because he senses something behind him. It's a familiar from the Phoenix, which is impossible since Erythonius knows that the thing is sealed away. The person who's speaking through the familiar admits that it is still locked up, and he's not all that happy about it since he went through a lot of trouble to free the thing. He does apologize for not showing up in person, but since he no longer controls Asphodelos, he wasn't going to put himself at risk. Erythonius doesn't need the man to show up since he would recognize his father's voice anywhere. The person talking to him is La Habrea, and it seems like he's been behind this entire thing. And he plans on using Erythonius for whatever his plans are, so he reaches out and snatches the man, but the Warrior of Light and Themis show up right on time to make the familiar drop him and leave. Erythonius is more than a little happy that the two of you showed up because he has no idea what the thing was about to do to him, and he wanted to tell you that La Habrea is the mastermind behind all of this. Themis admits that La Habrea has both the skill and position to pull something like this off, but the La Habrea he knows wouldn't actually do it. The Warrior of Light has a completely different view of the man considering her own personal experiences with him, but her opinion's been formed from the man she dealt with after he had gone through a whole lot of trauma. So Themis could be right, and the disaster at Pandemonium could be a step beyond what La Habrea would do to reach his goals. During the time that they met, while he did seem like someone who would take some odd routes to solve a problem, he didn't come off as someone who didn't understand what was right and wrong. The truth is, none of you will know for sure unless you head deeper into Pandemonium and see for yourself. And that'll be dangerous, because whether La Habrea is the mastermind or not, the person running the show and his lackeys will probably try to kill you when you set foot into Abyssos. Themis decides to guard Erythonius just in case they try to capture him again, which means the Warrior of Light will have to take the lead, of course. Since he doesn't know what will happen, Themis casts a spell on you that will summon the Phantom Warriors to help even if you get separated. It's a good thing that he does, because as soon as the three of you set foot into Abyssos, you're all teleported off into different locations. As luck would have it, you're snatched into a cage with a carbuncle. Not the cute little glowing one that Alphino used to run around with, but a creature that looks like what you'd get if Ifrit and a behemoth had a baby that they fed cocaine instead of milk. This carbuncle is hyperactive, violent, and apparently has the munchies, which makes me wonder what drugs did the ancient use before he decided to make this thing. After a very long and painful fight, the Warrior of Light and her summoned allies knock the thing unconscious, which gives Themis and Erythonius time to show up and seal it away. Just imagine if that was the carbuncle that Tataru had summoned back when she tried to be an Arcanist. I doubt she would have survived the experience. The area you'd been sent to is where creations made of poisons are studied, and it seems like the mastermind behind this whole thing was specifically trying to kill you. Before the three of you can figure out why, La Habrea himself appears and admits that he's actually happy that you proved to be strong enough to survive on your own. It'll make you an interesting test subject. At least he looks and sounds like La Habrea, but Themis won't be convinced, at least not until the man answers his question. La Habrea refuses and binds Themis in a trap, one that was supposed to catch both of you, but apparently your ether is so thin that it doesn't work. So he decides to try something else. The Warrior of Light is perfectly fine with fighting La Habrea since she has so much practice at doing it, but he warns her that if she does kill him, Erythonius will lose his chance to see his mother again. The fact that La Habrea even mentioned Athena makes Erythonius want to attack him, something that would have given the boy a legendary beating, but Themis stops him. He wants his question answered first, and all he asks is for La Habrea to say his name. When the man calls him Themis, that's all he needed to know to be certain that the man is not La Habrea. Then he casually breaks out of the trap, more than a little upset that the man would insult La Habrea by pretending to be him. Erythonius is confused because he may not like his dad, but he does know what the man looks and sounds like. But Themis is positive that La Habrea would never call him by that name. Right on cue, a fireball hits the fake La Habrea in the face, and the real one shows up calling Themis by a name that most of you knew was his way back when you first headbutted him at the beginning of the story. Elidibus. Since he's been outed, the imposter takes off his disguise and reveals his own face. He claims that he hated wearing it anyway because after all, who would want to pretend to be a man who murdered his own wife? His name is actually Hephaestus, and after telling Erythonius that he should be calling him Dad, he vanishes, leaving you all very confused. Instead of providing any answers, La Habrea tells Elidibus that he has some explaining to do, once you're in a safer place, and you all follow him, after Elidibus apologizes for hiding his identity from you, not like you didn't know it already. After Azim and Themis had detected the oddness from Pandemonium, they had decided that it would be for the best if he hid his station as Elidibus while he investigated. There's more to this story, but before Themis goes into the details, he wants to talk about you a bit. Even though neither he nor Azim had met you before, she had a lot of praise for you, which is why Themis had decided to work with you in the first place. Azim found the fact that you and she were similar as something that was funny, but she somehow knew that you'd make for a strong ally. The fact that Themis had heard about Vanad traveling with you made him trust you even more, despite how weird you and your ether actually are. He had just wanted to tell you that before he got sidetracked with all the craziness that's going on. Since Erythonius dives right into questioning his father in a very disrespectful way, the time for friendly banter is brought to a very swift end. After making it known that he had hoped to never talk to his dad again, he wants to know who Hephaestus is and why he looks like a younger La Habrea. And he wants to know why La Habrea only just decided to show up, because he definitely had to know what was going on in Pandemonium long before now. La Habrea had known what was happening, but he also knew that Themis and Azim had decided to investigate, so he didn't see any reason to join in, at least not at first. That changed when a keyword sent a message saying that everything was running like normal. After that, he figured that whatever Hephaestus had done was beyond Themis' control, so he came to check himself. The fact that he knew someone was pretending to be a member of the convocation and hadn't done anything about it was something that Themis had never thought he'd see, so he knows the explanation for all of this has to be pretty interesting. Technically, no one is pretending to be La Habrea. Hephaestus is using La Habrea's real name because he is in fact a part of La Habrea himself. He knows all of the same things, has all of the same skills, but he's fueled by all of the negative emotions that the ancients pretend like they don't have. greed, envy, lust, and such. He was a product of an experiment gone wrong from when La Habrea was younger, and he had thought he'd sealed the man away. Apparently he hadn't done a good job of that. Erythonius wants to know why Hephaestus had blamed La Habrea for Athena's death. What he really wants to know was, did La Habrea kill his mother? La Habrea says that the man is insane and he needs to be put down before he brings disaster to the star, but he doesn't confirm or deny the accusation. What he does do is decide that since he's in charge of Pandemonium, as of this moment, the place needs to be abandoned and destroyed immediately. The fact that he's willing to leave the warders who are still trapped in the place to die doesn't surprise Themis, since the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, so sacrificing the researchers of Pandemonium to prevent a star-wide catastrophe makes sense. But while it's the right decision, it isn't necessarily the best decision. Themis and Azim had even considered it themselves. That was why Themis had decided to head into the place to begin with, so he could see if total annihilation was in fact the best way to go. None of that matters. Once La Habrea got involved as the head keyword, his first job is to make sure nothing in Pandemonium affects the outside world, regardless of the cost. How any of you feel about it is pretty irrelevant. Obviously, Erythonius is upset about this, especially since you all, emphasis on the you part, have been dealing with and overcoming each of Pandemonium's creatures. La Habrea is a bit curious about you and your strange ether, and since you have been doing most of the heavy lifting, Themis wants to hear what you think should be done. Technically, what you think wouldn't matter all that much, but the Warrior of Light points out that since Themis holds the seat of the emissary Elidibus, he can determine if your approach is a good way of keeping Pandemonium's problems from spilling over to the rest of the star. If he says that it is, then even La Habrea will have to listen. Of course, he could vote in La Habrea's favor, then there would be no more argument and Pandemonium would be destroyed with whoever is still trapped inside. But he decides to keep on as you had been instead of taking La Habrea's scorched earth approach, at least until after La Habrea sees you all in action. Being a stickler for the rules even when he doesn't agree with them, La Habrea agrees to follow Themis' judgment, but if you don't seem like you're capable of containing the threat, then he will destroy Pandemonium. Erythonius is confident that you'll succeed, a confidence that La Habrea doesn't remember him having before. Getting even that small compliment from La Habrea annoys the man, and he decides that he's had enough of talking to his father and walks off. Themis gets that the man doesn't like his dad, but this mission is already going to be difficult without adding family drama to it, so Themis sends you to talk to the man to help him get his mind right. While he is upset, Erythonius makes it a point to let you know that he appreciates you helping keep La Habrea from destroying Pandemonium. He just couldn't let that happen after seeing how the keywards had given up their chance to escape when this all had started so they could keep the creatures contained. If they fought that hard, he knows that none of them would want to see the place destroyed, and they definitely don't deserve to be abandoned. Aside from that, he still wants to find out what Hephaestus knows about his mother, because he doesn't think the man was lying about La Habrea killing her. The only thing they had told him was that she died in an accident, and no one would answer any of his questions about it. Knowing his father, the man may not have killed her, but he would have left her to die to save the star, and Erythonius really wants to know what happened. Having someone to vent his frustrations to works wonders for calming the man down, and now he's ready to get to work proving to La Habrea that you all can save Pandemonium. And the best way to start is by taking Abyssos back, even though he doesn't want to. Since La Habrea will know more about what you'll face deeper inside of the facility, Erythonius decides that you should ask him, since he seems eager to see you in action anyway. La Habrea had asked Themis about you while you were talking to his son, and hearing that you're connected to Azim in some way has La Habrea even more interested in you, especially since you're unique, even among the literal thousands of concepts he's seen. Finding unique things in their travels seems to be a common trait among the holders of Azim's seat, since they tend to get more involved with people and things that more logical people would ignore. Kind of like what you're doing with Pandemonium. And Azim's tendency to ignore logic and do what she feels usually corrupts everyone she deals with. Emmett Selk said the same thing, but Themis promises that he won't let Azim's way of doing things interfere with his duty. La Habrea points out that he kinda just did by not letting him just destroy Pandemonium outright, but what's done is done, and La Habrea has no problem telling you about Abyssos, even though he doesn't have control of it anymore. For starters, he doesn't sense any more monsters wandering around the area, but Hephaestus has left something worse, Hegemony, the keyword of Abyssos, and she's been corrupted. She was very gifted in magic and extremely intelligent, and she hasn't lost any of that after her forced transformation. Since some of the normal her still remains, there may be a way to fix her, and Erythonius wants to seal her away until you all can figure out how. That means you'll have to fight her. The Warrior of Light and her summoned allies get to see firsthand just how skilled at magic the corrupted Key Ward is, and while she's formidable, she still gets wrecked, and Themis and Erythonius seal her away. Erythonius is pretty smug, since the victory means that La Habrea has to admit that the method they're using is good enough to save the place. La Habrea has no problem saying that he was wrong, and seeing how powerful the Warrior of Light is despite her thin ether is making it all the more interesting, so he agrees that your mission can continue, but he doesn't think Erythonius should be a part of it. He's not strong enough to seal the creatures alone, and just hoping it works is not a good strategy, especially since failure means death for more than just himself. But that's not the main reason La Habrea doesn't think he should stay a part of the team. It's his motives. His primary focus should be on stopping Hephaestus, but the fact that he's worrying about resurrecting his mother makes him dangerous to the entire mission. His mother is dead, probably reincarnated in a new vessel by now, and the life cycle needs to continue as it's supposed to. Even if Hephaestus could bring Athena's body back, it wouldn't be her. Erythonius still thinks it's possible that Hephaestus may have figured out a way to really revive her, proving La Habrea right. If he's that focused on his personal mission over the true one, what would he do if the price of resurrecting his mother was one of his own teammates, or the lives of all of the captives that he claims that he wants to save? From the way he's acting, La Habrea thinks all of that was an act, and he hasn't matured one bit from the ignorant child that he's always been. That last insult is more than Erythonius can take, and he snaps on La Habrea, calling him a selfish murderer. In the moment where he loses control, Hephaestus calls out to him, and despite hearing another voice telling him not to listen, Erythonius teleports off to join the man. Whatever he had used to take over Erythonius' mind worked quicker than La Habrea had expected. He had felt his son's hatred for him growing from the minute he had showed up, and he knew that it was only a matter of time before he snapped, and that let the spell take him. The spell was so good that Erythonius didn't even notice it, which means the other Key Wards likely didn't either. In the midst of the attack, you all felt another presence, one that was trying to warn Erythonius, but the warning came too late. La Habrea taunting the boy hadn't really helped the situation either. Hephaestus had likely known that would happen too, since he is La Habrea, and now there's no telling what will happen to his son. Themis doesn't think it's too late to save the man, you just need to take Abyssos before Erythonius fully loses himself. But it won't be easy to get through the place. Hephaestus has laid traps all over that will kill you if you trigger them, but with your thin ether, the Warrior of Light can pass them without setting them off. At least that's what happened before. If he's adjusted his traps, this will be a very short rescue attempt. While you need to be fast, Themis thinks it'll help if La Habrea explain why Hephaestus wants Erythonius. He also wants to know why La Habrea seems to have a real problem with his son's devotion to his mother. The man acts like grieving for the woman is just as bad as trying to raise her from the dead. Since Athena seems to be the driving force behind Hephaestus and Erythonius, the situation does need to be talked about. La Habrea admits that it does need to be discussed, but only after you deal with the last Key Ward. Her name is Aegisthus, and she's worked at Pandemonium since it was founded, and her magical skills are beyond all of the other Key Wards. Hephaestus' experiments wouldn't work without her, so he's locked her away in a spot that you can't just walk to or teleport to under normal circumstances. But with your ether being like it is, La Habrea can send you straight to her. Themis will help you with the fight as best he can, and from what La Habrea can sense, whatever's been done to Aegisthus left very little of her, so there's no reason to try to contain her. All you can do now is put her out of her misery. The Key Ward has been turned into a very disgusting tree beast, but the change has done nothing to lessen her power, which makes for a difficult fight, but again the Warrior of Light comes out on top. The moment she dies, a pathway that allows Themis and La Habrea to teleport in appears, which is strange since it seems like someone made it specifically for them. It was so neatly made and protected that it had to be done by a Key Ward of great skill, and Aegisthus, or what's left of her, appears to let you know that it was her that did it. She doesn't have much power left, but she is happy to see La Habrea again. Your fight helped her free herself from Hephaestus' spell, but it bombards you with so many emotions that it's hard to even remember what you really want to do. So if you don't remember that you want to be free, you could end up thinking that you want to serve Hephaestus. Honestly, this sounds like the origins of tempering. Aegisthus was strong enough that at least a small part of her mind stayed her, and she was able to reach out and talk in bursts to the outside world. She was the one who had sent the report saying that all was well to hopefully draw La Habrea. She doesn't have much time left before she fades away entirely, and she has one thing that she needs to let you know to keep the past from repeating itself. She apologizes to La Habrea, but she has to let you and Themis know why Hephaestus wants Erythonius. Whether he was okay with it or not, she didn't wait for La Habrea to say so before she made an image showing herself and a young La Habrea. He had just killed Athena and sealed a part of his memories and emotions away inside of Hephaestus, and after that Aegisthus had wanted to know whether or not he was going to tell Erythonius the truth. He had decided to leave his memories buried with his other half, because he was sure that Erythonius would let the world burn if it meant saving his mother, and hearing the truth would break him. La Habrea would rather let his son hate him than to let him know that the mother he had loved so much just saw him as a tool to be used and discarded. Besides, even if he told the boy the truth, he was pretty sure that in the end he would find some way to blame La Habrea, or maybe himself. So if dealing with his son hating him was the price of keeping Erythonius mentally able to serve the star, La Habrea was okay with it. It turns out that La Habrea was actually keeping the secret to help his son, but Aegisthus wasn't surprised by that. La Habrea is a problem solver for everyone else but himself. There's more to the story, but La Habrea will have to tell you himself because her time is up. He thanks her for what she did, since it would have been hard for him to even start telling the story, but after everything he sacrificed for the star's prosperity, she was more than willing to help. It was a good last act before she fades away, something that Hephaestus definitely sensed, so you all leave before he attacks you. La Habrea adds more details to Athena's story once you're all safely back outside. She was consumed by her research and willing to kill her own son if it sped up the experiments. That's why she had given him a position in Pandemonium in the first place. It will make him easier to use as a test subject. Themis fully understands why La Habrea would keep that a secret. Erythonius probably couldn't handle that news. Hephaestus has picked up where Athena left off and succeeded in creating the Hemithoi. La Habrea doesn't know what his plans are, but it has something to do with bringing Athena back. Themis wants to know the rest of the story, but that'll have to wait until after you free Erythonius. Reaching him will be easier since without Aegisthus, Hephaestus can no longer manipulate Pandemonium, and the only place that he could be is in Tartarus, where Athena had built her laboratory. That doesn't mean the man is going to just let you all walk in. Themis will focus on keeping him from blowing you up on your way there, which means La Habrea will have to summon your phantom allies, but he wants to be the one to finish off Hephaestus when you're done. He doesn't plan on sealing the man away again, and after the modifications he's done to his body, sealing him might not work anyway, which means it's time for you to face Hephaestus. Erythonius is chained up and unconscious in the lab, and Hephaestus is more than ready for you. The man's clearly been lifting weights because his new form is jacked, and kinda scary looking. It's not all show either. He's strong, but he still gets whooped by the Warrior of Light, and La Habrea comes in to finish him off. Hephaestus refuses to admit defeat, and in a true coward move, he puts Erythonius between himself and you like a human shield. While he talks like he wants to bring Erythonius' dreams to life, the fact that he's hiding behind him proves that he doesn't care any more for the man than Athena had, and he's proved that even more by not telling Erythonius the truth about his mother. He claims to care for the man like a father, but his actions say the opposite, and fulfilling a child's wish when it'll hurt them in the end is probably the worst thing a parent could do. La Habrea admits that after he killed Athena, he promised to guide the star down a good path, which made him neglect his son, so he has to admit that he's been a bad father, but he won't let anyone manipulate and use his kid, especially not a damaged clone of himself. Erythonius heard everything that was said about his mother, and he heard what his father had said, which helped him regain his own mind enough to break free, and he turns on Hephaestus and successfully uses the interment spell to trap the man. La Habrea joins in, adding his own power to the spell, and they seal Hephaestus away inside of a crystal. Despite still being light on the praise, La Habrea admits that his son did well, especially since he was able to trap Hephaestus while he was only half recovered from the man's spell. His skill with the interment spell is far beyond what La Habrea had expected. It only takes a moment for all signs of Hephaestus' spell to vanish from Erythonius' mind, and the fact that the spells attacking Pandemonium's barriers has faded away causes Themis to come running in to see if it's all finally over. It is, and Hephaestus has been locked away just how La Habrea had done before. Granted, the last time he hadn't actually had a body. That revelation makes Themis remind La Habrea that he was supposed to tell you all the rest of the story. Since Erythonius wants to hear it too, La Habrea decides that it's time to let it all out. Athena had been a genius that was so focused on her research that sometimes she would forget to eat or sleep on her search for knowledge about the secrets of life. The ancients create life, but they can't make souls. They can also enhance and change their physical bodies, but they still have limits. Athena was looking for a way to break those limits, something that's not meant to be done. Most people wouldn't even have the brain power to try and get it done. Since La Habrea was the leader of the Words of La Habrea, he talked to Athena about transcending their limits a lot. When a scientist finds a challenge, they always try to figure out how to overcome it. While they were talking, La Habrea started to think that the way they could ascend would be to merge with one of their creations. That way they could make something that countered their own weaknesses, fuse with it, and become something greater. It was just a theory, but Athena wanted him to work on it more and tell her about it. They started to talk more, and one thing led to another, which led to Erythonius. I'm not going to explain how they made him. I'm pretty sure you can find something about it on the internet. La Habrea had thought that Athena really cared about him, so he didn't notice her hidden motives, which is why once Pandemonium was built and she wanted to lead the researchers, he didn't see anything wrong with it. That gave her the ability to do whatever experiment she wanted. When he found out what she was doing, he rushed to Athena's hidden lab, not really knowing what he'd find, and for this part he figures it'll be better to show you, so he makes a scene similar to what Aegisthus had shown you before. Athena has Erythonius bound, similar to how Hephaestus had him, and La Habrea warns her that if she doesn't let him go, he'll have to kill her. She's willing to die for her research, but she wants La Habrea to know what she's doing. Once he understands what she's doing, she doesn't think that he'll want to stop her. Her explaining it wouldn't be enough, so she wants to bond souls with him. That way he'll be able to get his answers. Because he's actually curious, the two of them link. The only thing he saw in her was a desire to truly become a god that transcends mortality and their plane of existence, and she didn't care about anything else, not La Habrea, their son, or the star itself. Because of that, La Habrea separates himself from her, but she knows that he's just as curious to see if her experiments with Erythonius would bear fruit as she is, and now that they've shared a soul, there's no way for him to get rid of that curiosity. Eventually he'll walk the same path as she did, and he'll see her experiments to completion. To make sure that he doesn't, La Habrea tears that part of his mind and emotions away and leaves behind only his duty as La Habrea. The other part he locked in a crystal that became Hephaestus. Themis, in a very polite way, says that La Habrea is insane, since what he did to suppress his memories could have rewritten who he was. The rest of the convocation had noticed the change, and some of them had some idea about what he'd done. He could have destroyed the crystal, but since he'd never done anything like that to himself before, he didn't want to throw away that piece of his soul just in case he needed to put it back. He figures Athena had known what he would do and made a vessel to use the pieces of his soul to carry on the mission after her death. After hearing the story, Erythonius actually believes his father had really been looking out for him and decides to tell his dad thank you before you all head back outside. Themis is eager to go and tell the story to Azim, but La Habrea can't let him leave until they fully restore the place. And with the lab in Tartarus, they should be able to undo what was done to the researchers' minds and bodies. Erythonius still wants to know what made him so important and how Hephaestus planned on reviving Athena. Not that he plans on doing it, but he just wants to know. Since curiosity has already killed a few people, La Habrea forbids him from diving any deeper into it, and he plans on destroying Hephaestus' crystal to make sure this mess doesn't happen again. Themis agrees, although there's still the crystal that the Warrior of Light had to deal with. La Habrea hadn't even known about it, but hearing that it had a message in it piques his curiosity. Storing memories inside of a crystal is one thing, but putting a warning inside one is a lot more difficult. It also means that someone other than the four of you and Azim knew what was going on in Pandemonium. It could be one of the other warders, but they won't know until after they question them. Since that'll take a while, the Warrior of Light heads home to get the crystal so she can bring it back to La Habrea. That's gonna be difficult because Claudian's assistants have lost contact with his airship, and there's more. Nemgigi has detected a massive amount of energy coming from the ethereal sea. Of course, you go to the Aetioscope with them to check it out, and the first thing you see is Pandemonium has appeared in your world. Something that is clearly not good, especially since his appearance has gotten Alphino's dad's attention too. Portiono has been investigating the appearance of Pandemonium in the ethereal sea, and he's made a few discoveries that he thinks you should hear about, so you and Claudian scientists head to the Aetioscope to meet up with the man. Professor Claudian had disappeared when he went into Azizla alone, which was a good way to die since the place isn't exactly safe. His airship was found near the Etherochemical Research Facility, but he wasn't anywhere to be seen. There were signs that he forced his way into the facility though. Fortunat's people followed his trail, but it ended in a very unusual way. Both Claudian and the part of the place that he'd wandered into had vanished entirely. His people think that the part of Azizla that disappeared reappeared in the ethereal sea and was turned into the version of Pandemonium that's in the present day, which means Claudian may very well be inside of it. Fortuno thinks it's worth the risk to send someone into the place to find the missing professor, and by someone he means you. But there's another not so small issue that you'll have to deal with first. A creature from inside of the prison came out, and Fortuno's people saw the thing start eating the ether around it. Considering the fact that the ethereal sea is full of the souls of the dead, messing with it could ruin the entire cycle of rebirth, which means it needs to be dealt with quickly. After that, you'll be able to search for Claudian. The memory crystal was found in Claudian's ship, so Fortuno gives it to you just in case you can use it for something. Nemgigi thinks you may actually have a harder time dealing with the monsters in Pandemonium this go around, mainly because you don't have Themis there to summon phantom warriors to fight with you. But what she doesn't know is you've had the ability to summon people for a very long time now, so you head off to face the monster. This thing looks like one of the monstrous creatures from the Promised Neverland, and it's not exactly happy that you messed up its meal. It tries really hard to kill you for that, but you prove yourself to be the more deadly predator, and you put it down, freeing all of the ether-rich souls that it had consumed. As soon as the thing is destroyed, a woman reveals that she was watching your fight, and she was eager to see if you were just as strong as she had heard. And it's not just any woman, it's Athena, La Habrea's wife and the former leader of Pandemonium. She's also the person who made this new place, right in the heart of the ethereal sea. She wasn't exactly expecting to run into you in this time period, but that might work out for the best considering all that you managed to accomplish when you stepped into the past. She seems to be way too aware of your exploits, and considering the fact that you learned that she was in fact completely nuts, the Warrior of Light is prepped and ready to attack her despite the fact that she claims to not be a bad guy. She's done some things that were questionable at best, but they were all in the name of science, and since she was reborn, she plans on continuing those experiments. She'd like to do that without violence, and she thinks that if you hear her out, you might see that her experiments are worth completing. The Warrior of Light is a tad curious, especially about how the woman managed to be reborn at all, so she holds off on the stabbing and lets her talk. Athena had always planned on using the souls of the ethereal sea for her work, since the place provides all of the materials that she needs, but she hadn't planned on finding someone as useful as Professor Claudian. She does have him, but she's not gonna hurt him since he's a part of what she needs to finally become a god. The more she talks, the closer she gets to making the Warrior of Light stab her, and she sees that, so she decides to summon some people who can tell you more about her and her work in a way that you'll be more receptive to. And since you have the memory stone that Claudian had been studying, she could use that to summon your teachers. That particular stone holds the memories of both La Habrea and Erythonius, and she uses her powers to give those memories physical form. That way they can explain why she's trying to become a god. She wants you to understand because you have a part to play too, and she figures things will go more smoothly if you just decide to cooperate. She teleports away, leaving you with Erythonius and La Habrea, who both have a lot of questions for you since they have no idea where they are or why. So you take them back to the Aetioscope where you can talk without worrying about getting attacked by anything. The two ancients don't know how long it's been since they last saw you, but the fact that they remember you means that the memories that were stored in that particular crystal came sometime after you went through Pandemonium on Elpis. Erythonius remembers you telling him about the crystal, but he never would have guessed that the memories that it held belonged to him and his dad. Finding out that you were from the future does clear up a few mysteries though, especially since he had looked for you after a while but couldn't find a single trace of you. He remembers the final days hitting the world, but he doesn't know how the event ended. Seeing that your future exists lets him know that something survived, but he wants to know if his people did. That's not exactly a simple yes or no question. And La Habrea doesn't feel like wasting time getting you to explain it all since Athena being there may not let the world survive anyway. While the two ancients look like they have physical bodies, other than their mind and memories, they don't have any actual power. Athena made them so they could talk to you, not help you fight. But honestly, even doing that wasn't going to be all that helpful to her plans, since she should have been well aware of the fact that her husband, who outright killed her to stop her plans in the first place, wouldn't have anything good to say about what she's doing. He definitely wouldn't try to convince you to work with her, so I have to say that her pulling their memories out of the crystal was not smart at all. Erythonius doesn't know how she knew that they had worked with you in the first place since she was extremely dead at the time, but La Habrea figures that she must have made a way for her to either monitor the goings on in Pandemonium even after her death, or she'd found a way to get the info after she was reborn. Either way, she knows more about current events than they do, which is never a good position to be in. So La Habrea wants Claudian's people to tell him everything they've learned about this modern day pandemonium once they stop hiding in the corner. When you finally convince them to come over and talk, Nemgigi admits that she's excited to talk to the ancients in the semi-flesh, but she is a little scared. A 9-foot-tall La Habrea is kind of intimidating, but since they don't have the power to do anything more than talk, Erathonius doesn't think anyone should be scared of them at all. Turns out being disintegrated by the power of an ancient wasn't what Nemgigi was scared of anyway. She was just afraid that she wouldn't have enough time to ask all of the questions that she wanted to. But as long as she's willing to share her information with them, La Habrea is perfectly fine with answering any of her questions. After he tells you everything he can about Athena and her mission to become a god, which would have ended with everyone on Atheris being killed. Athena believes a god should be able to create souls at will, and she wants that power. That's why she decided to do her last experiments in the ethereal sea. The place is a limitless pool of ether that she can draw from. Granted, drawing on that ether could put an end to all life, but she doesn't really care. Even knowing that, seeing his mother's face still reminded Erathonius of how much he loved her. Granted, he still plans on working against her as best he can. While they put their information together, they all think it's time for you to get started searching through the prison. Before you leave, Erathonius takes the memory crystal from you, just in case it has any more useful tidbits stored inside of it. While he helps you get into Pandemonium, La Habrea asks Nemgigi if she knows anything about something called Auracite. She knows a bit about it from the legends of Ivalice and from the things she's heard about La Habrea the Ascian. She almost mentions his name, but considering the fact that she's talking to a priest sundering La Habrea, she catches herself in a way that lets the man know that she was clearly about to say his name in connection with the black Auracite called the Heart of Sabik. Apparently La Habrea recognizes the name, but he figured that it would have been lost after all of these years. That means it'll likely be an issue in the near future, but first you have to deal with whatever you find inside of Pandemonium. You'll have to clear out an area alone before the two ancients can help you search the place, so you head in to get started. The first thing you find is the last thing you expected to see. Themis. He's not actually Themis, but something Athena made using a soul and some magic. He's just as real as La Habrea and Erathonius, but he hasn't gotten dumber because he immediately figures out that he's in the future. Athena revived herself somehow, and you've come there to stop her. He expected no less, but there is a problem. He was made to serve Athena, and he can't resist her, so the two of you will have to fight in the not too distant future. It's not something the Warrior of Light wants to do, but Themis reminds her that he's just an illusion, so it's not all that big of a deal. Even though she programmed him to fight you, Themis is still willing to spill Athena's secrets because she's apparently really bad at the whole making loyal servants thing. And he lets you know that she has a new vessel to replace Erathonius, and she's gathering souls to modify her essence. The problem is those souls aren't all that strong, so she's decided that the Warrior of Light would be far more useful to her if she can figure out why you're so strong despite your thin ether. She made something to test you so she could watch and learn the secret of your strength. And I'm not gonna lie, I think she has a whole lot more faith in your abilities than you do because the woman's not making you fight some random creature. She put a soul inside of Pandemonium itself so the whole building can fight you. Themis expects you to beat the thing pretty easily, then after that the two of you will throw hands for the second time. Athena could have made the living fortress be a little less creepy looking, but she was probably more interested in power over appearance. But she didn't give it enough of either because the Warrior of Light and her summoned warriors destroy it. With the walking fortress beaten, Themis shows back up, and he's quite impressed by your handiwork as usual. Your victory opened Pandemonium's last gate, and that's where he'll wait for you. Erathonius and La Habrea show up right as he leaves, so La Habrea wants you to tell him what the man said so you all can figure out what to do next. Once you tell him about Athena's plan to make you fight Themis, he's not all that surprised. The boy was one of the most magically gifted ancients, so of course she would use him if she could. Which means she probably snatched his soul out of the ethereal sea and used Themis' memories to build the perfect puppet. Erathonius is more shocked to hear that Athena actually managed to bring Pandemonium to life. The fact that she could do that means she's almost at the end of her research, but after trading notes with Nemgigi, they figured out a way to stop her, and they think the Heart of Sabik is the key. The Warrior of Light recognizes the name, which she should, since La Habrea had used it to power the Ultima weapon and try to kill you with the Ultima spell. The heart is something that Athena made during her time with the words of La Habrea before Pandemonium even existed. She had brought a crystal that she said she found somewhere to them, and the thing held a lot of power. She called it Auracite and started studying it, and eventually she created the Heart of Sabik from it. Athena never told them where she found the original crystal, so they figured that it was from another star. It wasn't until later that they figured out that the aura sight enhances the desires of anyone who comes in contact with it, which would explain why Athena went a little overboard with her work after she found it. But by the time La Habrea had locked the aura sight away, Athena had already gone so far down her crazy path that he had to kill her. After that, he took the heart of Sabik and decided to guard it himself, since the thing held some of the densest and most destructive ether he'd ever seen. It was all but impossible to study, but he thinks Athena may have done something to it to make it that way so no one would know that she had stored her memories inside of it. If she had set up a way to give her memories physical form, similar to how she drew La Habrea and Erythonius out of their stone, that could explain how she could have been reborn, but it doesn't explain what made her come back at this very moment. When the Warrior of Light beat La Habrea in the Ultima weapon, she hadn't taken the time to grab the heart of Sabik. Granted, she had only heard the Ascian mention it, plus it wasn't like there was time anyway, so she hadn't seen it since that day. La Habrea, the Ascian not the Ancient, wasn't dead, so he very likely took the heart with him. A good while later, he was killed in the Aetherochemical Research Facility by Thornton, and that just so happens to be the exact place where Claudian went missing. The professor had been following the ethereal signature of something that was similar to the memory crystal that he'd found, which was likely the heart. Since Athena had reappeared not long after that, it's safe to say that he had something to do with her resurrection, but that still leaves the question of why. On top of that, even though Athena's a memory made flesh like La Habrea and Erythonius, she's just as powerful as she was when she had a physical body, or at least close to it, which means she must have found a vessel that was capable of containing her power. But with all of the people of the source being sundered fragments of what they used to be, that shouldn't have been possible. Possible or not, she's done it, and if Themis is to be believed, she's very close to making that body into a god. The thing is, the only body that should have been able to hold the power that she needed was Erythonius, and his body would definitely have decayed a long time ago, so the mystery of what vessel she could be using won't be solved right now. Not before you fight Themis. Erythonius doesn't think the fight will be easy, but he does think that if you win, you may be able to break Themis from Athena's control. If you weaken him enough, it should work, but he won't remain solid for long once his essence starts to dissipate, so you'll have to ask your questions quickly. Granted, you also have to survive the fight, because if anyone remembers the last time you faced off against the Litubers, you would know that survival's not exactly guaranteed. Themis doesn't take on the form of the first Warrior of Light like his Ascian form did, but what he turns into is far harder to deal with. The Warrior of Light still manages to pull off a victory, which causes Themis to transform back. With his defeat, Athena's hold on his mind breaks and he goes back to normal. He was well aware of the fact that Athena's magic could make her victims focus solely on their greatest desire and ignore everything else, but he hadn't thought that the thing that he wanted most was to test himself against you. Now that he's done his part, Athena releases him so he'll fade away, but the Warrior of Light uses her own ether to hold Themis together for a little bit longer. At least for long enough for him to do his job as emissary and judge Athena for her actions, and see that she's punished for them. You'll have to do the punishing part, of course, but he does have some information to share with your group that can help, so the two of you go back to meet up with La Habrea and Erythonius so you can get ready for your showdown with Athena. The vessel that Athena has is actually Claudian, which under normal circumstances wouldn't work. But Claudian turned out to be the perfect host, which let Athena put her memories into his body while his soul was still intact, and that let her resurrect herself in full as opposed to just being a living memory like Themis and the others. But since Claudian is a sundered being, Athena hasn't been able to put her full power into him, which is why she set her sights on you. Even sundered, the Warrior of Light is stronger than most of the ancients, and Athena figures that if she could add those properties to Claudian's body, she would have a vessel strong enough for her purposes. You have to stop her, obviously, but doing that won't necessarily mean you have to kill Claudian. Athena taking over his soul didn't destroy it. He just doesn't know that he's being controlled at all, so if you can wake him up, he should be able to push Athena out of his body. Erythonius doesn't understand why Claudian's body worked as Athena's vessel at all, but it should be pretty obvious by now. Claudian is a shard of Erythonius, the same way that the Warrior of Light is a shard of Azem. Themis didn't see Claudian, but he did hear Athena call him Erythonius, so that pretty much proves it. La Habrea had already figured that out because of course he did, but since Themis confirmed it, La Habrea thinks he knows how to save the man. The first thing that has to be done is the obvious, and that's beat the crap out of Athena so she can end up in the same weakened state as Themis. Granted, she has way more power than he had, and since you're the only one who can even fight her, you'll have to do it alone. After you do that, La Habrea has a plan that he won't tell anyone about because he's La Habrea. Well, that's part of it. The other reason he won't tell is because he doesn't want you thinking about anything other than fighting Athena. She's too strong for you to fight her and worry about Claudian's safety, which makes sense. Erythonius already has a lot on his mind too. Mainly he's wondering if his mother had never found that aura site, would she have actually been a loving parent and wife? La Habrea's wondered the same thing too, but there's no point in worrying about it since there's no way to know for sure. Since there's no point in delaying the inevitable any longer, you head off to fight Athena. A lot of people claim to be a god, and usually they're all talk. Athena isn't one of those. She's managed to build up real power. Unfortunately for her, she's not the first god the Warrior of Light has had to tangle with, and as per usual, she overpowers the god-to-be. Once Athena's back in her more manageable form, Erythonius wants to know what was the point of all of this. What was she really trying to achieve? La Habrea doesn't really care. The woman worked against the star, and for that she needs to die for good this time. That may be true, but Erythonius still wants to know why his mother abandoned her family for a mad quest. Athena's surprised that her son actually grew into somebody who would question why she would do anything instead of just going along with whatever she decided. But since he asked, she's willing to answer. Granted, her answer is pretty anticlimactic. She had a theory and she wanted to prove it. Simple as that. She came to the conclusion that any real god would see her race as imperfect and would spend all of their time finding ways to remove their flaws and build a better being. Athena figured that the best way to help the star was to find a way to upgrade her people into the perfect stewards for the planet. And to do that, she needed the power to create souls, and she was perfectly fine with killing all of the imperfect life on Etheirys to get it. She honestly sounds like Emmett Selk, but without the actual motivation. He saw the sundered beings as imperfect and was willing to kill them all to restore the far superior ancients. Athena just came up with the idea that her people could be better and she could make them better if she had the power to create her own race. She claims that what she's doing is no different from what her people did all the time when they created new things and wiped out the old ones. The problem with that comparison is she didn't make the ancients in the first place, so since she didn't give them life, she doesn't have the right to decide that they don't need it anymore. While the aura site made her go over the edge, it didn't give Athena these ideas, no different from when someone gets drunk and does something that they regret. They always had it in them to do whatever it is that they did, they just had the good sense not to. The alcohol suppresses that good sense, and the aura site did that to Athena. The woman actually takes offense at the fact that Erythonius thinks he has the right to judge her, when he only existed to be a vessel for her power. She figures that his rebellious streak must have come from the fact that she left him with the soul. The woman got pregnant with him for the sole purpose of modifying his body so it would be able to handle her essence when she took it over. She modified his mind so he would adore her and follow her commands no matter what. But she made a few mistakes on that part. His lack of magical ability, all of his failures as a person, were all things that Athena made sure would happen as part of her plans, which honestly makes her quite possibly the single most evil person in Final Fantasy XIV. Valens was a child-murdering dick, but it takes a special kind of crazy to intentionally make your own child suffer up until the very day that you decide to kill them and have that be your plan before they're even born. Obviously, getting that type of information hits Erythonius pretty hard, but he handles it pretty well. And he lets his mother know that now that he knows what she wants, he'll make sure she never becomes a god. Athena takes that in stride and changes her plan. If she can't become the god of Etheirys, then the star doesn't need to exist at all. While you were all talking, she had been building up ether, and she turns it all into a spirit bomb that she's going to use to destroy the ethereal sea, which would wipe out all life on the planet. There's pretty much nothing that the Warrior of Light can do to stop her, but La Habrea had told Erythonius before the fight even started that he was the key to beating his mother. While he is only a memory, his soul is currently in the body that Athena is using, something she clearly hadn't thought about when she pulled her son's memories out of that crystal. He can merge with his shard and wake him up. That way Claudian can push Athena out of his body, stop her attack, and make her just as powerless as any other memory until she fades away for good. He probably won't survive the encounter, and while some people would say that he's just a memory so it doesn't matter, he's alive, and self-preservation instincts alone make sacrificing yourself difficult. But the fact that La Habrea says that he's proud of him probably made the decision easier. Athena tries to command him not to, but after what she told him, she would have done better not saying anything at all. Fortunately for you and the rest of the world, Erythonius separates Athena from Claudian, causing her to lose all of her power. But that also causes Pandemonium to start to collapse. La Habrea and Themis use the little bit of power that they have to get you and Claudian out of there, while Athena dies, but not before she solidifies her place as Mother of the Year by using her last words to tell Erythonius just how useless he is. The Warrior of Light and the others make it back outside just in time to watch Pandemonium vanish. All that's left to do now is wait for Claudian to wake up. While you're waiting, La Habrea has something that he wants to ask you about. He hadn't missed Gigi's mentioning of the Ascian named La Habrea when she was telling him about everything that happened to get them to that point in history. She claimed that him and that particular Ascian weren't the same person, but the fact that he had used the heart of Sabik to do some not so nice stuff has him wondering. Since you met and fought the Ascian, he wants to know if that's who he'll become. The fact that telling him won't affect time since he's just a memory in the present means there's really no harm in it. But since the two of them are completely different personality-wise, the Warrior of Light isn't certain whether this La Habrea or his successor becomes the body-snatching psycho that we all hate. The Ascians also switch bodies a lot, so that also makes it kind of rough to know their real identity. And after hearing some of the things that the Ascian did, La Habrea does have a hard time seeing himself becoming that. But after thinking about it, he admits that under the right circumstances, he probably would do pretty much anything if it meant fulfilling his duty to the star. That includes using the heart of Sabik and going down the same path that Athena had, which means it's safe to say that he is in fact the La Habrea that you fought. While you chat, Claudian finally wakes up and he remembers bits and pieces of what happened, including seeing you fight Athena. He has Erythonius' memories too, and he wants to tell La Habrea how his son felt about him, but hearing the words from a sundered piece of his son is not the same, so he'd rather not, especially since he's technically the enemy of every living thing on the source. Claudian doesn't see it that way. The Ascian La Habrea is their enemy, but the La Habrea of the Convocation is an entirely different person, one who helped save them all. Being the logical man that he is, La Habrea thinks Claudian's an idiot for thinking that, but he's not going to argue the point. He does think that you still have one thing left to learn from Pandemonium, and that is who was it that started all of this by setting Hephaestus free in the first place. That means you'll need to take one more trip to the past. He does warn you not to tell him anything about what happened to Athena. He doesn't think he'll change what he does, but you never know. With that said, he finally fades away. Themis feels like he's going to fade away soon too, but he thinks he can stick around so he can hear what you learned from the past. Technically, he already knows what you're going to find out since he's a memory of Themis from after you went back, but he wants to hear what you think about the news. So you head back into the past for what needs to be the last time, because time travel is always making new plot holes and paradoxes that are never fixed as smoothly as people think. When you get back to Pandemonium in the past, La Habrea and the others are all surprised to see you since they didn't think you had a reason to come back there at all. When you tell them what you want, La Habrea isn't that eager to share any information with you, but Themis thinks that you do deserve a few answers since you did help fix the situation. After you left, Themis had given control of Pandemonium back to La Habrea, and using some of Athena's research, they managed to restore Hegemony's mind and body. There's still a lot more prisons to fix and key wards to replace, but they're making progress. But before they can get the place back up and running, La Habrea has something that he needs to do, and he's willing to let you watch as long as you don't interfere. It involves Hegemony. He called her to meet with him because after all of the deaths, she's now the highest ranking key ward. That means she needs to know the full details about what it took for La Habrea to separate himself from Hephaestus. He fractured his soul to do it, and that cost him a lot of his power. He doesn't have the strength in his present state to use the magic that Hephaestus had used to control Pandemonium's warders, or to free them from that control. Hephaestus had left behind some research that said to transform a vessel into one of Athena's Amythoi, you had to have complete control over the victim's mind. The magic that gave that control got it by amplifying the victim's strongest emotions, which in the case of Hesperos and Aegisthus was their respect for La Habrea. That let Hephaestus throw Pandemonium into chaos and take it over. But he couldn't have done that until someone set him free. That means someone was already under Athena's control before any of this started. It was the only way for the woman to guarantee that even after her death, her plans would get put into motion. And considering the fact that Hegemony had worked in Pandemonium under Athena herself, her loyalty was to her and Pandemonium, not to La Habrea. The woman tries to explain herself, but La Habrea binds her because he knows that Athena messed with her mind. But as he is, he doesn't have the power to undo it, so he decides that if he's going to have the power to truly serve the star, he has to repair his soul and merge with Hephaestus, bringing with it all of the power and painful memories that he had tried to banish. With his powers restored, he easily burns Athena's mind control out of Hegemony. That doesn't necessarily mean that she likes La Habrea, but he doesn't need his people to like him as long as they do their job. And he thinks Hegemony would be the perfect person to oversee Pandemonium from now on. She is more than willing to do the job while he works to safeguard the star. As long as that remains his goal, Themis won't have to step in and put him back in his place, something he seems confident that he can do even with La Habrea at full power again. Now that he knows why his father is the way he is, Erythonius plans on working with him on his mission so they can be a family. The two of you, however, are not friends. So with this little excursion over, La Habrea tells you that it's time for the two of you to part ways and walk your separate paths. He says that like he knows where the two of you will end up in the future, even though he shouldn't. But like I said before, time travel is always a problem. With that done, you head back to your own time to talk to Claudian and future Themis. While you were gone, Themis let Claudian know everything that happened while Athena had Orochimaru'd his body. And that little bit of info let him understand that the ethereal signature that he had sensed in Azizla had been Athena trying to find her vessel. But it hadn't started when he first found the memory crystal. The thing should have activated as soon as he touched it, since he's Erythonius and it held his memories. But Themis figures that the changes brought about by the Sundering must have made it take longer to resonate with the fractured soul of the Ancient. But once he did get attuned to the crystal, that let Athena start to take him over, so he was already under her control before he even left to go to Azizla. All of that is over now, but with his mind clear, Claudian can sense another memory stored inside of the crystal, and he hopes it holds the answers to why La Habrea and Erythonius had created the thing. Since he has Erythonius' memories, Claudian knows how to activate the crystal, so he turns it on and you all see the moment Erythonius put his final memory into it. The final days had started and things had started to go crazy with their creation magic, but La Habrea and the Convocation had gotten started on the plan to summon Zodiark. Themis had already agreed to become Zodiark's heart, but the one thing that the Convocation seemed to have forgotten about in the chaos was Pandemonium and the dangerous creatures that it held. Even if they stopped the final days, if the chaos caused the cells of Pandemonium to open and those creatures were allowed to run free, the final days stopping wouldn't have saved the world, it would have just ended in a different way. So Erythonius decided to go against the Convocation and not add his strength to Zodiark. Instead, he would stand guard over Pandemonium alone to make sure that the creatures wouldn't get out. But he didn't know if he would die during the final days, so he decided to send the crystal with his and La Habrea's memories into the underworld, with a spell on it that would make it be drawn to his essence, so even if he died and got reborn, the crystal would remind him that he needed to get back to Pandemonium. And if he couldn't make it back, he hoped that it'll find someone like the Warrior of Light to help with whatever problems popped up. And this is why I hate time travel. So Erythonius sent the stone into the ethereal sea because he didn't know if he would die and be reborn during the final days. If he did, the stone would find him, jumpstart his memories, and have him make a beeline for Pandemonium. That part makes sense. Him mentioning you doesn't, because he shouldn't have known you at the time that he made the stone due to the fact that he only met you because he sent the stone and Claudian found it, which prompted you to go back in time to start this story. Time travel shenanigans aside, Claudian's happy to finally know how all of this started, but there is one more thing that will likely be a problem later. The heart of Sabik survived, and it was in Claudian's pocket. At least it doesn't have Athena's memories in it anymore, but it's still a powerful piece of auracite that Claudian plans on studying. He heads off to do just that, leaving you alone with Themis, who has one last thing to tell you. He was pulled from the ethereal sea, and he has memories of your fight at the top of the Crystal Tower and of him sending you to the past. He doesn't know exactly why he sent you back, but he thinks he had seen bits and pieces of your trip through Pandemonium together. He didn't see how that journey went, but he saw you in Elpis, so he knew that he had to send you there. In other words, he saw you there because he sent you there, so he knew that he had to send you there. After Themis gives you a migraine trying to explain these shenanigans, he fades away into the ethereal sea, and the Warrior of Light heads off to save the world from whatever crisis pops up next. This concludes the story of Pandemonium. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, donate if you can, and I'll see you guys next time. After some events in Heavenswood that I'm not going to spoil here, a Primal was summoned and sealed in a cocoon, much like Bahamut had meant, and it won't be long before it breaks free. The Gallians, of course, were interested in the thing, so they sent the ship to investigate, and it got blown out of the sky, so they decided not to approach like that again. That means dealing with it before it breaks free will be a real problem, and if a Primal of that level escapes, it could lead to a calamity on the same scale as the one Bahamut had caused. At the moment, not even Sid has an idea on how to deal with the issue, but Nero, who's always willing to take any opportunity to one-up Sid, shows up, and he actually does have an idea. The Primal inside of the cocoon is on the level of Bahamut, which means the best way to deal with that Primal is to use the same machine that had trapped the dragon in the first place, Omega. The thing has been sleeping beneath the plains of Cartano since the time of the Allegans, and no one knows how to wake it up. No one except for Nero, that is. And he's willing to help. Since it's not like you have any better ideas or the time to figure one out, Sid can't really turn the man away, so Nero proves his usefulness by pointing out one simple thing. If the Allegans were able to turn Omega off, then it can be turned on again and controlled. Granted, if you can't control it, you'll have turned on something even more dangerous than the primal you're trying to fight. It's a valid concern, but an irrelevant one since you have no other options. And while Nero always has his own goals that may very well lead to your death, he did prove useful when you dealt with the Crystal Tower, so if you watch him, it should be okay. So the Alliance puts Cid and the Scions on the task of reviving Omega. Just in case Nero does anything shady, Alice gives Yugiri permission to kill him, and of course she's okay with that. So you all hop onto the Excelsior to head out to Cartno after a quick trip to the Rising Stones to get a little more information and to snatch up some allies because there's bound to be some fighting, especially since the Garleans know about Omega and will probably be coming for it. Out in Cartno, Nero turns on the teleporter to Omega's control room, but of course a group of Garleans show up, just like you expected. They attack you because that's what they do, and Nero leaves you to it while he goes in the control room. Since Cid won't let the man press buttons without somebody there to watch him, he follows him inside while the rest of you deal with the Garleans. Nero doesn't just leave you all out to dry, he sends his own personal Magitech suit to help you blow things up. That gives you the edge you need to force a retreat, and then you can head inside too. Between Nero and Cid, the two of them manage to wake up Omega. As soon as it turns on, it detects the trap primal, but there's also no controls. Apparently the thing was made to run on its own, which means controlling it is out of the question. So once it beats the primal, it'll need to be put back to sleep. Now let's be honest, how many of you actually think that'll work? But there's still no other option, so the button is pressed and Omega powers up and flies off to deal with the dragon primal Shinryu right as it breaks out of its cocoon. The amount of power released by the primal and Omega far exceeds anything you've seen before, but after the two of them get into an anime style beam struggle, the explosion sends them both flying off somewhere. All signals from the weapon stop going to the terminal where you are, which could mean that Omega was destroyed, but you won't know until you all check with someone who was outside and able to see the fighting. Apparently Emmerich saw both the Primal and Omega fall out of the sky somewhere over Alamigo, and they both looked pretty dead, but you won't know for sure until you get closer. Cid did press the shutdown buttons for Omega, so if it ends up in the Garleans' hands, it shouldn't do them any good. That doesn't mean that Cid and the Ironworks, Nero included, won't search for the thing. They still want to find it first. The Ironworks sets up shop in Rauga's Reach while they hunt for Omega, and during their search they find out that Shinryu was taken by the Garleans. The thing was already tied up when they found it, which means Omega had restrained it. That also means it hadn't powered down when Cid had told it to, so there's no telling what the thing is doing. They've pretty much found out where it's located, but before they can head to the site, they have to deal with a little problem called Nero. Apparently Jesse hired him on as a consultant for the Ironworks on the Omega hunt, even though Cid was hoping to be rid of him after they lost the thing. He doesn't trust him, but firing him wouldn't be the smartest thing to do since Jesse already paid him in full, and his salary was about as high as Cid's. Plus, whether they like each other or not, you can't deny the fact that Nero is good at what he does. That doesn't mean Cid's gonna let him roam around unsupervised, and guess who gets put on chaperone duty? Truthfully, Cid's glad you're there because they still don't know how powerful Omega is. Even if Shinryu damaged it, they don't think they'll be able to shut it down without some added muscle, meaning you. Cid's found the place where the weapon probably crashed, and having you check the site with him will leave him a little less unsettled. I don't remember the Warrior of Light ever saying no to anything, which is convenient because the ether readings at the yawn where Omega crashed have started to go crazy, meaning it's probably waking up. Without wasting any more time arguing, you all race off to the yawn. Something strange is going on at that giant hole. For starters, it's full of ether so thick that you can see it. It's so unusual that it causes Midgard Sormer to appear. The Elder Dragon hadn't talked to you since the Dragon Song War ended, but when he smelt Omega, he had to come out. He's known the weapon for multiple lifetimes, and they are not friends. Before the dragon could tell you any more, you're all interrupted because a chocobo that looks like a children's toy comes flying out of the ether swimming pool with a very big winged snake trying really hard to eat it. The chocobo leads the thing right towards you all, but instead of eating Cid, it passes right through him. The thing is one of Omega's creations. Midgard Sormer tells you that Omega was made somewhere far away, and it has the ability to create life with ether. The snake isn't finished, which is why it passed through Cid's body, but the dragon is positive that Omega will finish it soon, then he'll have it try to eat you again. The snake flies back into the pool of ether, but the weird chocobo stays behind. The thing looks like a toy, but it is about the size of the chocobo that the Lalafell ride, so everyone just takes Wedge's word for the thing being real. Since it came from Omega, Midgard Sormer talks to it for you because apparently he can speak stuffed animal. The fact that the tiny dragon is the same Midgard-Sormer who supposedly died at the Battle of Silver-Tier Skies is not something any of the others expected, but Nero is more than willing to use the dragon's ancient knowledge since there's not all that much known about Omega. The first time it appeared in any records was way back in the Third Astral Era, before the Allegan Empire became the Nation of Legend, and the only thing the record said is that Omega was successfully activated. After that, Allegan technology jumped ahead in leaps and bounds, but Omega was never mentioned again until the capture of Bahamut. Some people, Nero included, had assumed the Allegans had built Omega, but apparently it came from another planet. And because Midgard-Sormer likes to study from the school of keeping people in suspense, he won't say any more about where Omega came from. He did talk to the Chocobo and it told him about a weird place that it had lived in since it was made. It was created to fight by Omega so it could test the power of its creations, but it wasn't that strong so it ran, and somehow ended up in your world. That's all it knew. If you want to know more, you'll have to jump into Omega's ether. The ether has made the hole a portal into Omega's domain, so the fall won't kill you. If you decide to go, the little Chocobo agrees to guide you, and since Midgard-Sormer and Omega have a history, the dragon offers to help you too. So, because you're all geniuses, you jump feet first into the gooey purple ether and end up in the white room from the Matrix with your bodies as transparent as the flying snakes had been. Omega appears as a giant old school box TV, claiming that he's been waiting for you. You are in a rift between dimensions where he is in the middle of running an important experiment, and if you refuse to participate, he'll erase you from existence. Probably should have read the terms of service before you logged into his world, because you signed your life away on the dotted line and now there's nothing you can do about it. After you decide not to die, Omega assigns you to what he calls the Alpha Group and brings you into the heart of his dimension. The purpose of his experiment is to determine who is the strongest being in creation. He has chosen 89 different participants and grouped them by dimension, then put them against each other. Like the Final Fantasy version of the Mortal Kombat tournament. I would have said it was like Super Smash Bros., but these are death battles, so I think Mortal Kombat is more accurate. The Chocobo, who Omega calls Alpha, is the leader of your group, but your position might change after Omega puts you through a strength test. He needs to know how well you can fight before he can determine your value. He'll create an obstacle course for you, and if you can make it through and reach the Deltascape testing world, then you'll be labeled as worthy subjects. Before you can even interact with things, you have to be authorized by Alpha, which basically means you'll no longer be transparent. Once that's done, you all get to fight your way down Omega's testing road, which takes a little bit of something from all of you. Wedge does a little work disabling some barriers, while the rest of you get to break some things. The preliminary tests aren't all that difficult, until Omega creates a behemoth to put you down. But you all deal with it and reach the Deltascape, where Omega has creatures from other dimensions ready to fight you. Since you made it through the test, Omega got the chance to gauge your strength. By his calculations, your group is the weakest, most pathetic group among all the other creatures he's chosen. Unlike his other combatants who he's recreating based off of beings from other worlds, you are actually physically there, so you can use this part of the rift to enter the Deltascape and defeat your opponents. You can bring a few allies, but Omega has set a limit so you can't bring a whole army and just overwhelm his creations. So in typical Sid fashion, he sets up a small command center in the area where they can gather all the information they can on your opponents. And your first opponent is that same snake that you saw chasing Alpha, only this time it's finished, so its teeth won't be passing harmlessly through you. Your first fight in Omega's Tournament of Death is against a giant serpent who honestly isn't all that powerful once you're actually able to hit it. Since the robot was talking about grabbing the strongest beings, you would have expected him to get something a little stronger than a flying garden snake, but no one's really going to complain about an easy win, especially when you're not likely to have many more of those. Sid and the others were able to watch your battle on the different monitors around the Deltascape hub after he and Nero did a bit of hacking, and they weren't all that surprised that you won the fight either. They tried to learn a little bit about the thing you were fighting, but other than its name, they didn't get much, although they think they'll be able to do better in the future. With a little more snooping around, they realized that there are a total of 4 people for you to fight in the Deltascape, including the one that you just beat, which means you still have 3 more matches in this world alone, and seeing how Omega has a lot more of these digital worlds out there, you're gonna be busy. The reason why the robot is so focused on finding who the strongest being is a whole nother question entirely, one that Midgard-Sormer has an answer for. Omega's primary goal is to improve itself, and the best way to do that is by fighting strong enemies. After it beat Shinryu, it didn't have any stronger opponents, so it decided to make its own, which is why it created this not-so-little test. But making life isn't Omega's primary function, so making complex creatures takes a serious toll on it, which is why it's making creatures in this Matrix-style world. That way it can determine which one is actually worth creating in the real world. So once the test is over, Omega will create something even stronger than Shinryu so it can fight it. Needless to say, a fight on that scale could cause another calamity, which means stopping it is mandatory. There's still the question of Alpha. Unlike Omega's other creatures, the weird chocobo was fully formed even outside of the rift, but it's not the most complex of creatures, so Omega may have finished it on accident. When Omega had first flown off, Sid had tried to put it back in stasis, which didn't work, meaning something had likely malfunctioned, and since any means of stopping the superpowered robot is important, Biggs figures that he and Wedge should head back to Cartano to see if they can figure out what went wrong while you keep doing your usual job of smashing things. If Biggs can't figure out how to turn Omega off, then the only way to stop him from making something even stronger than Shinryu is for the Warrior of Light to prove that she's the strongest being in creation. Granted, then you would have to fight Omega, which is still bad. But for now, there's nothing to do but keep on with the tests, and for the second match you have to fight a creature that can manipulate gravity. Nero being Nero, he's already built a device that should help you counter that power. So it's off to the second Deltascape battlefield you go to face off against a very disgusting monstrosity called Catastrophe. If it wasn't for Nero's little toy, the tentacle monster definitely would have murdered you, but because you brought the right tool for the job, the battle is another win under your belt. Since there's no telling how long it'll be before Biggs and Wedge have something to report, you may as well move on to the third challenge, which has you dealing with a being called Halicarnassus, the Queen of Dimension Castle. Nero actually knows the name, and since it's some knowledge he has that Sid doesn't, he makes it a point to rub it in the man's face. She's the villain from an old fable that was loosely based on some events that supposedly took place in the 4th Astral Era, but there's no way to know for sure. People think the story is pure fiction now, which means Omega is bringing fairy tale creatures to life. Considering the fact that Omega is a machine with no real creativity of its own, the only way it can create a new rival is by using other people's ideas. Omega has knowledge of entire eras stored in its memory banks, and that knowledge isn't just from one particular shard, but the whole concept of real and fake doesn't really mean anything to it. So whether a story was true or not, that won't stop him from bringing the concepts to life. So whether Halicarnassus was real or otherwise, you're still about to have to fight her. And it is definitely a unique experience straight out of a storybook, but she's still not the weirdest or most powerful thing that you fought, so you pass another of Omega's tests without all that much effort. For the final challenge, you have to face a name that will be familiar to some, XIV, which is the recreated version of the main villain from another world, namely Final Fantasy V. The only info Nero was able to pull up about him was that he can wield the power of the Void, but he has no idea what that power will actually do, so his advice is just don't get hit by it. See it as something a little more useful to add. Both Halicarnassus and XIV are people from stories where they were defeated in the end by heroes, which means they weren't even the strongest beings from their own worlds. So why wouldn't Omega recreate the things that beat them instead of the ones that lost? That's a very good question, one you don't have an answer for. And after Sid gets a call from Biggs, there are even more questions. Apparently the stasis field is showing every sign of being activated even though it's not. It could have just malfunctioned after taking some damage during the calamity, but the controls are complex even compared to other Allergan devices, so the odds of them figuring out a quick fix are slim, which means you have to go and face off against XIV. He proves himself to be a strong challenge for the final match of the Deltascape, but as expected, the Warrior of Light manages to win. Since you won all 4 matches, Omega shuts down Deltascape and declares you the victors. His other test worlds haven't completed their trials yet, so you get a moment to lick your wounds out in the real world while you wait for round 2. The whole thing seems to be going too smoothly for Nero's liking, but Midgard-Sommer thinks his mistrust is misplaced. Omega could have done this entire experiment without letting any of you know, but instead it brought you in and let you make it as far as you have. It makes the dragon ask the question that Sid and the others should have been asking. What is Alpha, and why was he sent to you? Sadly, not even the little chocobo knows its own purpose, which means all you can do is wait and see. To top things off, Omega hadn't expected you to survive, but he's noticed that certain beings tend to get stronger when they are put into really stressful situations, which means if he wants to draw out your true potential, the best way to do that would be to put you under severe stress, and nothing does that like killing one of your friends. After the traumatizing experience of dealing with the first part of Omega's test, The Warrior of Light, Sid, Nero, and Alpha, who unlike Omega's other creations, seems perfectly fine being out in the real world, all head back to Rauga's Reach to let Jessie know what happened. She's extremely grateful for how much you've helped the Ironworks with their Omega investigation. And I'm gonna be honest, the more she talks, the easier it is to see that Jessie is the true owner of the Ironworks, which makes sense since Sid likes to dive headfirst into danger. When she finally notices Alpha, she decides, since he followed Sid home, that he's basically part of the Garland Ironworks family, and since he's cute, she wants to make a lot of merchandise out of him, which is pretty good business. People buy cute things, and businesses like money. Sid thinks it's a bit rude to talk that way about a guest, but that's why Jessie runs things, because he'll miss out on opportunities over little things like respect and manners. Usually Biggs and Wedge would be there to add their own unique brand of insanity to the group, but for some reason they haven't made it back from Omega's control room yet, which has Sid a bit worried since that place isn't exactly safe, so he decides to take his ship and go and check on them. And to make sure he doesn't get sidetracked, Jessie sends you and Nero with him, and Sid decides to bring Alpha to keep Jessie from starting her plan of making toys out of him. Out in the Cardinal Flats, you find both Biggs and Wedge badly injured. A monster had appeared out of thin air to attack them. Omega's voice comes over the computer system claiming that his mission was a failure since Biggs and Wedge survived, but since the attack did stress you out, his original objective was fulfilled. Omega doesn't even try to hide the fact that it attacked your friends. It can create simple life forms instantly anywhere, and while they won't be a threat to the Warrior of Light, most of your kind are far more squishy, and Omega could set hordes of creatures loose in any city or crowded area that he chooses, raining death and destruction down on the people without warning. Omega's plan is still to find a formidable warrior, but during his hunt for proper test subjects, he came across people who others called heroes. Throughout history, they were unremarkable people who managed to overpower far superior beings by doing what some people would call miracles. If it had happened once or twice, Omega could have ignored it, but it's far too common for him to simply write off. That's what the robot wants to understand. That way, if this power to transcend one's limits is something he can learn, he'll add it into his own evolution. That's the main reason why he brought you to his realm. Because you were able to overcome the first trials, that makes you fit to stay on as his test subject. It's not like he's giving you a choice. If you quit, he'll wipe out the mortals. I don't think Omega would be able to kill everyone, but there's no doubt the death toll would be massive before it could be stopped. So you have no choice but to participate. But first you have to get Biggs and Wedge some medical attention. Sid and Nero take your injured friends to the Conjurers Guild to get patched up, while you head back to Rauga's Reach to let Jessie know what happened. She's obviously worried, but she calms down a bit when Sid shows up and lets her know that they'll live. It'll be a while before the Conjurers let them go, but they'll be okay. Sid blames himself for ever activating Omega, but he didn't exactly have a choice since you all needed something to fight Shinryu. But with Omega threatening to kill everyone, it's not like the situation is any better. Nero actually fusses at Sid for blaming himself like he's some type of hero who has to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. He's a scientist, not a fighter, and protecting people is someone else's job. He's the person who makes the discoveries that makes the lives of the people heroes protect better. But ever since his dad caused the destruction of Bajra, he started trying to be more conservative, which limited his creative juices. Nero wants him to knock it off, because when he's not doubting himself, Sid tends to do the impossible, which is a serious compliment coming from Nero. Whether Nero's pep talk worked or not remains to be seen. Regardless, since the stasis field can't be reactivated, you have to go through Omega's trials. And that means you could be fighting anything Omega comes up with. So all that's left is to wait for the all-powerful Murderbot to summon you. Before they were attacked, Biggs and Wedge had found a tombstone, so Sid's gonna use this little bit of downtime to see what information it has on it, just in case it might help you with the next thing Omega throws at you. It doesn't take long for the Ironworks to detect the surge of energy from the yawn, which means Omega is probably getting ready for the next test. Despite the impending doom that will come if you were to fail one of these tests, Nero seems to be excited about all of this. But since you don't have a choice but to participate, you may as well have fun. Which means it's time to head back to the yawn. But before you leave, Jessie gives Alpha his very own Garland Ironworks uniform, which Jessie made primarily to advertise some of their merchandise. With that out of the way, it's back to the yawn you go, and once again Midgard Sormer comes with you. When you step back into the rift, it's pretty clear that some things have changed. Some of the floating eggs are missing. That's because while you were away, Omega kept his experiments going, and half of his test subjects were wiped out, all in the fashion he had predicted. All of them except for yours. To remind you of what he will do if you fail, Omega shows you the images of Biggs and Wedge lying on the floor half dead after his attack. Midgard-Sormer asks his old enemy what has it actually accomplished since the end of their war, other than simply still being alive. The robot can't even remember where his home planet is, but that doesn't take away from his objective to fight and evolve, and that means he needs to see what you're capable of. So once again, Alpha Group has to fight their way through to Omega's next testing site, and Alpha plans on helping you this time. Of course, this test is far more difficult than the first one, but Alpha proves to be more useful than you expected, and Nero has upgraded his Garlean armor. He summons the armor like Iron Man, and his weapon is Mjolnir, so he's literally an Avenger who helps you take down Omega's version of Emperor Zand. Nero's armor was cool, but Sid's more curious about the cool magic that Alpha used. While it looks cute, Alpha was made for combat, so the little chocobo can fight. After seeing what you can do, Omega labels you as inferior test subjects, and he even sees Midgard-Sormer as weak, but since the dragon is far weaker than he was in life, that makes sense. He had given his life to Heidelin when he had brought his children to a world, so she could summon him whenever he was needed. Omega had chased Midgard-Sormer when he had fled the Dragon Star, but when he had made it to your world, he couldn't find the dragon, so it had started working on repairing itself while it looked for something else to fight. That still doesn't tell Omega why the dragon is helping the mortals. Omega and his people caused the destruction of Midgard-Sormer's home, which makes the dragon hate to even look at the robot, so he helps you so that you can destroy Omega. That thought is illogical because even Midgard-Sormer in his prime couldn't beat the robot, so helping something as weak as you doesn't make sense. But that doesn't matter. It's time for you to enter the Sigmascape and continue the test. In the Deltascape, the image that was floating on the giant egg was a castle. This time the image is a mask. Sid and Nero have no idea what it is, but it's very creepy. Since they don't have anything to go off of, they can't figure out what you're going to face, so you'll have to go in your first challenge blind. That challenge is against the Phantom Train. This fight should bring back a lot of memories for those of you who played Final Fantasy VI, but unfortunately you can't suplex the train. You do stop it nonetheless. That fight was extremely strange, but it gave Sid the data he needed to figure out the Sigmascape. Apparently it is the recreation of a devastated world that has some places with names similar to the ones in your world like Doma, but their histories are different. As for your next opponent, it is Chartanuk, which is a demon that possessed a painting. Nero has actually built something to help you change things around you by painting to help you counter the powers of the demon. And as payment for his efforts, he wants some tea, but the teapot was empty, which makes him insult Sid's parentage. Since the two are arguing over the tea, Alpha decides to set one of his cards with a picture of spring water on it beside the teapot before you dive back into the Sigmascape to fight the demon of the painting. The fight was intense, and without Nero's little toy you wouldn't have won, but you had it, so you won. Of course, the magic brush was only meant to work there, and if you try to use it anywhere else, it won't do anything. After the battle, Sid gets a call that Biggs and Wedge have recovered, and they're heading to the Yawn to see you guys. Nero, of course, stays in the rift to try and learn more while you, Sid, and Alpha go to check on your friends. The two of them weren't exactly supposed to be up and out, but they didn't want to lay around while you fought. But you're all making things work without them, although the little jobs like keeping the teapot full have been getting neglected. The two agree to go rest, but they want you all to call them if something goes wrong. While you're talking to your friends, Nero learns that the next challenger isn't all that special, but your fourth opponent may be a problem because he seems to be nothing but total chaos. While he's working, he takes a sip of his tea, which was apparently made with salt water, which makes Nero think that studying Alpha's cards might be a good idea. The whole time he's working, Omega is watching, and he decides that your group is getting too comfortable, so he attacks Nero. Whatever Omega didn't kill Nero, but he doesn't look well when you guys return. Instead of telling you about the attack, he blames it on the salt water in the teapot. He knows Sid didn't do it because he didn't fill the teapot at all. Instead, the water came from the card Alpha used by the pot. Nero leaves Sid to help you deal with the third challenge while he gets ready for number 4. The third one is against someone called Guardian, and it should be a straightforward fight. The machine is designed to switch through a bunch of different fighting styles, but compared to what you fought before, it's nothing special and you take it down a lot easier than some of the others. The things that you fought in Sigmascape show that whatever world Omega copied was very advanced in both magic and technology. Sid wishes they could have learned from them, but it's time for the last fight in this world. It's against someone that every Final Fantasy VI player will know very well. Kefka. Sephiroth may be the most famous Final Fantasy villain, but he failed at destroying the world. Kefka succeeded and obtained godlike power, and that's what you're going up against. And Kefka is insane, so figuring out his techniques won't be easy, so Nero tweaked the monitors so he can watch the fight more closely, that way he can help you. Kefka is just as crazy as he was in his own world, and he's just as powerful, but he lost to Terra and her crew in Final Fantasy VI, and he loses to you, which concludes your test in Sigmascape. With the fighting done, Nero finally collapses, which forces him to admit that Omega had attacked him. But he doesn't regret staying behind alone, because regardless he can safely say that the only reason you survived the Sigmascape is because of him and his inventions. But he knows he won't be able to help with the next round, so Cid's gonna have to step it up, both to beat Omega and to fulfill his goal of freedom through technology. Omega congratulates you on your victory, once again overcoming your limits and beating enemies who were stronger than you. He thinks he's figured out how you do what you do. During regular activities, you subconsciously limit your strength, but when you fight, your power increases by an unpredictable amount, which means he needs to put you in serious danger to see what your true power is, and he decides to do it right now. Omega seals the Warrior of Light in a prison, and in 3 minutes he's going to kill you, so you'd better do everything you can to escape. Alpha tries to break you free, but he's far too weak, so Midgard-Sormer draws on all of the power he has left to shatter your prison, but using that much power forces him to hibernate until his strength comes back. Before he fades away, he tells Omega that trying to force you to use a power he doesn't understand is stupid. If he wants to see your true power, he needs to finish his experiments, not try to skip steps. He fades away and Omega decides to listen to his words and let you recover before the next test. Before he changes his mind, you, Cid, and Alpha take Nero back to Raga's Reach to give your report to Jesse and to get Nero some medical attention. He's not doing well. He was hurt pretty badly by Omega's creation, and it was a miracle he stayed on his feet for as long as he did. But it goes without saying that he won't be able to join you when Omega summons you again, meaning your crew has gotten even smaller as you get ready to step into the final leg of Omega's test. Back in Raga's Reach, the Warrior of Light shows up just in time for Jesse to tell her that another anomaly was detected at the Yawn, which means that Omega is ready for you again. That also means you don't have all that long to wait before Omega decides to attack the world. Cid's been working hard on figuring out how to deal with the Murderbot, and since he still hasn't shown up, Jesse lets you know what he's been working on. After your last run-in with Omega, Cid had some research notes smuggled in from Garlemald. All of the papers were things left behind by Cid's father, Midas, who was basically the Empire's top engineer and the one who had built the tower meant to harness the power of Dalamud, which led to the destruction of Bastia. Cid was supposed to take his father's position as the chief engineer, but after the Bastia incident, he decided to leave Garlemald altogether. He had never liked how they operated anyway, and the Bastia incident was the last straw. But since things are getting desperate, Cid must have decided that the knowledge that had been used to make the lunar transmitter might be the only thing that can solve the Omega problem, because if Cid is willing to do one thing, it's whatever it takes to solve a problem. Cid finally shows up after Jesse tells you everything, which means it's time to head to the Yawn. Unfortunately, Biggs, Wedge, and Nero are still in no condition to help, neither is Midgard-Sormer. Jesse volunteers to join you, but Cid needs her to finish the device he was working on. While she heads off to do that, you, Cid, and Alpha head to the Yawn. Cid does have a plan, but the only way to know if it'll work is to test it, so the three of you dive back into the interdimensional rift. More of Omega's test worlds are gone, meaning his experiments are nearly over. Out of the 89 groups he tested, only 4 had survived. Omega pitted them against each other, and now only 1 is left. And you will face off against that world. If you win, then you'll face Omega, so he can finally figure out how you keep beating opponents who are so much stronger than you are. That way he can add that ability to his own repertoire. This time Omega won't put you through the evaluation process since he already knows your strength level, but he does declare that Alpha's part in this is all officially over, since Omega will personally give you access to the rift. But whether he's needed for that or not, Alpha's a part of the crew, and Cid wants him with you. Omega can't understand why you would want Alpha along since he's now useless, not to mention the fact that Alpha was originally made to be bait to lure you into Omega's domain, which worked out quite well. For some reason, Cid and the Warrior of Light hadn't figured that out, but it's not Alpha's fault. The little chocobo has no memories of anything that happened before he met you. He was the first thing Omega had made in the rift, and it was his only attempt at making something based off of an ordinary life form that had managed to beat an enemy that was nearly as strong as Omega himself. He wanted to watch Alpha to figure out how that was even possible, but despite him repeating the experiment 1,000 times, Alpha simply died, which led Omega to make his current test with you. So he erased Alpha's memories and planted the command to come back into the rift, then he sent him out into the world. Since weak creatures like to form groups to survive, he figured Alpha would gather test subjects for him. And it worked like a charm, despite the fact that Omega's ability to create things wasn't meant to be used to make life forms. The ability was meant to be used to improve Omega's weapons and armor, but nothing prevents him from using it in the way that he has. But Sid knows the dangers of using technology for things outside of its original purpose. It never turns out the way it's supposed to, which is why all of Omega's test subjects have been weaker than they should have been. His creations could never replicate the things that had motivated their original selves to achieve great or terrible things, nor could it copy the strong desires that the heroes had to use to overcome their enemies, which is why nothing Omega makes will ever be able to beat you, at least according to Sid. That still remains to be seen, so after Sid gets the base camp ready, it's time to get ready to dive into the final test world. Omega didn't even bother trying to hide who you were fighting. Your opponent is Chaos, the main villain from Final Fantasy I, and a name I'm sure you've heard over and over in the Stranger of Paradise trailer. It makes perfect sense that Chaos was the winner of Omega's little contest, and it definitely won't be an easy fight. But before you head off to kill Chaos, Sid has to assure Alpha that regardless of what Omega said, your current situation isn't his fault. It was you all who woke Omega up in the first place, which means if it's anyone's fault, it's Sid's. The little chocobo still feels bad, but Sid gives him the job of keeping the teapot full with his magic card, and that makes him feel better, so it's off to fight Chaos you go. Chaos isn't nearly as difficult to overpower as he should have been, proving that Sid was right to think that Omega could not create creatures nearly as powerful as they would have been in their original realities. Regardless, you've won, completing Omega's experiment and proving yourself to be the superior warrior. But the robots still can't understand how you do what you do, which makes him start to believe that Sid was right about his creations being flawed. He begins to wonder if mortals simply have an ability that he can't measure, but he can't accept that, and decides to examine you from a different angle. He sends you to a new place that he creates from his own memories, a place where he fought an enemy like none he'd ever faced before, one that he never got to beat. He can't recreate it exactly, but he comes close. Since he couldn't defeat this opponent, if you lose, Omega will still fight you. If you survive, that is. Which is unlikely, since you're about to face off against Omega's version of Midgard-Sormer himself, one that is nearly as strong as he had been on the Dragon Star. Omega wants you to fight the dragon right away, but since you just had a fight with Chaos and aren't at full strength, Omega listens to Sid and allows you to head back to your base camp to rest, where you find Alpha standing there with a very invisible Sid. Apparently, whatever Alpha had used to make the tea caused Sid to turn invisible. Fortunately, it turns out to be temporary. They really need to study Alpha's cards, but first you have to figure out how to fight Midgard-Sormer. With what you've learned from Omega, it's pretty clear that both the dragon and Omega come from other worlds, worlds that were at war with one another, which is what made the dragon grab his children and leave the Dragon Star with Omega chasing him. What you're up against is the younger, more savage version of the dragon that Omega remembers. Even though you've squared off against the dragon in the past, this is definitely going to be different. And since Omega created this battle on the spur of the moment, Sid can't even use the monitors to learn anything. So instead of wasting time while you fight the dragon, Sid will go to make preparations for the battle with Omega. So all you have to do is fight a version of the father of the first brood and not die. The fact that this version of Midgard-Sormer is not at his full power in this form is very good because you wouldn't have beaten him otherwise, and very bad because if at his full power he couldn't take down Omega, the Warrior of Light is probably going to die. Sid watched your battle while he worked, and he noticed that Omega's version of Midgard-Sormer looked a lot like Shinryu, which isn't all that strange since Shinryu wasn't summoned with any particular belief system to dictate how he looked. When he was summoned, he was meant to be a being as powerful as Bahamut, and apparently that made him take the form of the oldest dragon on Hydaelyn. It's not important, Sid just finds it ironic that summoning Shinryu led back to Omega, meaning you were seeing history repeat itself, at least a little bit. Regardless, you've passed the final test, so Omega shuts down all of his test worlds and transfers all of his power back into himself so he can test you properly. It seems like a battle you're destined to lose, but Sid thinks he knows Omega's weakness, and he's been working on something that should let you take advantage of it. He just needs a little more time to get ready. Always being one to use every tool at his disposal, he plans on making use of Alpha's cards too if it comes down to that. Aside from what looks like junk that the little chocobo keeps with him in places that I don't plan on trying to figure out, he has one card that looks like it either makes you bigger or smaller. Since he's not all that sure how it works, Sid thinks it'll be better to let Alpha decide when it's the best time to use it, which doesn't ease the little guy's worries at all. As a last bit of backup, Sid fills up a vial with Alpha's turn you invisible teapot water, just in case it has a purpose. With the preparations made, and a little pep talk for the chocobo that gets him fired up, you all head out of the rift to get Sid's device from Jesse. You follow Sid back to the Reach, where even though his device is ready, his hand trembles when he reaches for it because he's still traumatized by what his father had done when he used that particular bit of tech. Nero comes to talk to his old friend despite the fact that he's supposed to be in bed, and like Sid, Nero already figured out Omega's weakness. When he'd fought Shinryu, the only thing that had made it through Omega's defenses was a burst of lightning, so electricity can do some real damage. But it has to be a serious burst of electricity, like enough energy to, say, wipe out a city, which is why Sid is having an issue. When his father had made a link between the lunar transmitter and Dalamud, he came up with a method of gathering and storing massive amounts of energy, and that's what you'll need to beat Omega. Sid's improved his father's device as best he could, so it should be safe, but he can't stop thinking about the Bosnia incident every time he looks at the thing. He still sees the dead bodies and how the Empire's leaders didn't care at all. The biggest problem is that all of the death and destruction was caused by technology that was meant to help people, which is why he left and vowed only to build things that helped people. But the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and regardless of what he's wanted to do, there's always a way for things to go south, and he has to think about them and plan for them, which is the complete opposite of how he used to be. But even though he's changed, his overthinking has caused problems too. As usual, Nero solves Sid's mental dilemma with a very simple solution. Omega is all about testing people to find out what's the best way to do things. Sid can use the same method on himself. He feels that his new, more cautious way of doing things is superior to the old Sid. If that's the case, then the device he's made should be enough to stop Omega, because the old Sid would have been able to build something that could do the job. So basically, if you survive, Sid's new way is superior. If not, you all die. That should make Sid more nervous, but his hand stops shaking, so it's time to head back into the rift. Sid gives the Warrior of Light the control switch for the item he uncreatively named the Omega Jammer, so you can throw massive bursts of lightning at the robot with a little help from Sid, and you step into the arena to do battle with Omega. As expected, Omega is incredibly powerful, but with Sid's Omega Jammer, the Warrior of Light manages to beat the robot. Omega analyzes your fighting style and the sporadic, unpredictable way you fight, along with the random bursts of strength at critical moments, which reminds him of Midgard-Sormer, but the immeasurable changes seem stronger in weak creatures like yourself, which doesn't make sense to him. There has to be something special about you, and Omega's programming demands that he adds the ability to himself, which means he needs to approach the problem from a different angle. He needs to change his own physical structure, and he'll need to collapse the rift to do it. Unfortunately for you and Sid, there's nothing but the void outside of the rift. If it collapses, the two of you will die, which is Omega's plan. He can't have you alive to attack him while he remodels his body. You were good test subjects, but you're replaceable. He'll just send Alpha out to find new ones once he's done changing. Omega and the rift vanish, leaving you, Alpha, and Sid alone in the void. Alpha, being one of Omega's creations, is built to be able to find his creator, so he races to where the robot is. Omega believes that you and Sid died when the rift collapsed, but using a combination of Alpha's invisibility T and his shrinking card, the two of you shrank down and rode the little chocobo back to Omega. Alpha, the thing that Omega thought was useless, is the only reason you're still alive. The fact that Alpha went to such lengths to save you is something Omega can't understand, but having you there allows him to finish his tests. He completes his transformation and emerges in his new body, a very human-looking body. Apparently he decided that your form was superior, so he decided to use it for himself to learn its secrets, and the fight won't end until he does. Omega spends the fight learning his new body, including switching genders to see how differently each body moves. When you push each body to the limit, Omega decides that fighting you as a team might be more effective. Even fighting you as a group, Omega couldn't beat you, and even in defeat, he still can't understand how you do what you do. He can't understand Alpha either. Somehow, without fighting you, the little chocobo has become like you, gaining the ability to overcome great obstacles that should be too much for him. The thing that Omega can't understand is the human soul. It's something that no amount of fighting could teach. It was something that he could have learned if he had worked with you like Alpha did. Omega finally begins to understand the source of your power, and he wonders if he had it, would he be able to make it back home? But that's the opposite of how the human spirit and will works. If he could truly understand what it meant to be human, he would know that trying to take a journey that long would break the strongest will. Staring up towards his home, Omega finally understands and dies, which leads to the next problem. The rift starts to collapse. Fortunately for you, Biggs and Wedge come riding in on the back of Racevelger, sent of course by Midgard-Sormer to save the day. For his entire life, Midgard-Sormer had never asked Racevelger for anything, so he likely sent him to make up for the fact that he had led Omega to your world in the first place. Unfortunately, there's no telling how long it will take for the dragon to recover, but he's still watching the world while he sleeps. He had formed a bond with his new home, and he will continue to look after it. That help allowed you to survive your victory over Omega, something Sid is not going to complain about. With that situation resolved, you all head back to Rogger's Reach, while Biggs tells you how the two of them had come to the yawn to help when they saw the ether in the pit bubbling like crazy. They were gonna jump in, which would have definitely killed them when Racevelger showed up and offered to give them a ride, and the rest is history. Back at the Reach, after hearing about what you did, Jesse figures that what they will do if another Omega shows up is just build another U to send after it. But that's a problem for another day. For now, the other Alliance leaders are eager to hear what happened with Omega. Sid plans on telling them everything, although it's doubtful they'll believe the story. What the Warrior of Light needs is rest, and as for Alpha, after taking him for a walk around Rogger's Reach, the little Chocobo decides to go on an adventure of his own to see the world with his own eyes. And after a tearful goodbye, the little Chocobo heads off to see the world with a little Omega model that Biggs and Wedge had built that may have more of the real Omega in it than they think. In Old Sharlayan, the Warrior of Light runs into one of the technicians who had worked on the ship Ragnarok, and since you've made it back from Ultima Thule, they've been going through the ship's flight logs. Your journey left them a lot of records about places and events that they had never dreamed of, but one of the transmissions they had pulled from the logs had been intercepted while you were in flight. They think it's an audio message, but none of their people have been able to decipher the language. They had almost given up, but they think they figured out the way to crack it, and it's only fair that you be there to hear it. As it turns out, the reason the Sharlayans have a chance of decrypting the message is because they called on the Ironworks for help. Biggs is the first one to show up, and he's surprised, but not really, to see that you're once again in the middle of something interesting. The message is alien, probably from a very far away star, and aside from the Moon Bunnies, the Sharlayans don't have many space allies to ask for help. So they called on the Ironworks, and the first thing Wedge thought was that it would be a good idea to see if Omega could figure out the message. Not the big Omega that tried to kill you all, but the little model that they made. It was supposed to just be a simple device that would follow a target, but Biggs had seen it acting odd on more than one occasion, and after hearing the reports that came back about the Omicron and how they could store their minds as data outside of their bodies, Biggs started to think that Omega may have put his mind into their model right before you finished it off. So teaming up with the Sharlayans, Biggs and Wedge added a voice box to the toy. When Wedge and Alpha show up with the Omega minion, the Warrior of Light asks him if he's in fact the same Omega that you fought. Turns out that it is one and the same, but Omega admits that he's no longer a threat in this new form. According to his calculations, he's about as strong as a baby, and the machinery that let him switch bodies died with his older body, so he's stuck where he is. If the model breaks, then Omega will die, permanently. In short, Omega is no longer a threat. Before he'd switched bodies, he'd re-examined his directive and decided that even though his form had changed, the mission of evolving hadn't. So he still wants to figure out what makes you and others like you so strong. And since Omega recognized the language in the message as Pan-Galactic Basic, he uses a different tactic to get what he wants. One that's almost as effective as brute force: blackmail. Since Sid apparently uses the floor as a storage space for notes, Omega read a report on the final days, and he learned that his planet of Alphatron was destroyed after Meteon got there. After reading the report, he also got a decent understanding of Dynamis. What he doesn't understand is why the Omicrons weren't immune to it, since they shouldn't have been driven by emotion, yet their leader still had the desire to end it all after dealing with Meteon. So Omega wants to study all the factors of the final days to get a better understanding of the heart and the intangible and oftentimes illogical emotions that come with it. And for that, having the help of an illogical being like the Warrior of Light would be perfect. And it's not like you have a choice if you want Omega to decipher the message. Alpha will probably tag along, but the little chocobo fell asleep during Omega's long and boring conversation. Instead of just going over Sid's notes with the robot, Wedge thinks it'll be a more enjoyable experience to go and do the research on the final days in the field. That way you can find Omega's answers and keep Alpha awake. Maybe. Omega is okay with that, and there are 3 specific things that he wants to study. The first is how the final days cut through Razat-Han. He couldn't really find any pattern in the people who transformed. It all seemed random, so he wants to visit the place. It's a long way from Old Charlian, but fortunately, since Omega and Alpha are both practically toys, Omega points out that if you just put them in your pocket, you can teleport with them to the Aetherite crystals, which will make the trip a lot faster. It works, so you, Alpha, and Omega head around the city talking to people to try and figure out how they avoided transforming into blasphemies. After talking to the people in the city, Omega tries to come up with answers on how they avoided transforming, but all of the people's reasons are so different that they do nothing to tell him where the source of their strength came from. He decides to try to talk to someone who lived a similar life to someone who did turn, but managed to avoid it. He decides on a merchant similar to Kazal, so you take him to talk to a man named Jinabaha. The only thing that Jinabaha thinks that may have helped him survive was the fact that he was more focused on protecting the workshop than being afraid. But then again, fear over not being able to fulfill his duty to his people may have been what caused Kazal to transform. Which again, doesn't help Omega much, but Jinabaha knows a guy named Nashvan who might benefit from talking to you. So your very odd group heads out to find him. The man's extremely excited to see you or any member of the Scions who had helped him and a lot of other people escape on the day when people had started to turn. He lost his son that day and he likely would have turned himself had it not been for the Scions. Even afterwards, he had lost the will to do anything, but Jinabaha kept giving him random jobs to do until he was able to pull himself together again. Omega can't understand how giving someone who's lost the will to do stuff to do, actually helps since every instinct in the man's body was telling him to just lie down and die. It doesn't help all that much when Nashvan tells him that the thing that made him want to give up is now the thing that makes him want to keep going. The concept is so hard to grasp that Omega starts to wonder if he just doesn't have the ability to understand human emotions. The fact that humans don't even understand why we do some of the things we do should have clued him in, because you can put multiple people in the same situations, give them the same upbringing and resources, and they all still might make completely different decisions. Omega decides that it'll be for the best to just accept the fact that people are random and move on to the next part of his study, and that takes place in Garlemald. He wants to study the Ilzabar contingent and the people of Garlemald because he can't understand why the two groups didn't immediately start working together despite having a mutual enemy in the Telophoroi. While that is something that a logic-based machine wouldn't be able to understand, Omega should have thought about how the cold would affect his new form. For the moment, he hasn't frozen to death, so he wants to get started with talking to people. For the most part, the locals have started to get a bit more friendly with the outsiders now that Julius and his Imperial soldiers have started to help out. There's still people who think it's a trick and the foreigners are using their odd magic to enslave people's minds. Granted, anima was used to do that, but it wasn't done by the outsiders. Still, it's progress, although Omega points out that talking to the Garleans isn't the best way to take over their nation. That's also not the goal, which has the Omicron wondering why the outsiders are even in Garlemald. The fact that some of the Garleans are willing to starve to death rather than accept help from people they don't like is stupid to Omega, because it is. And the fact that the Ilzabar contingent is trying to help the Garleans despite them not wanting it is also stupid to Omega, because it is. The people are all irrational, and Omega thinks that all Omicrons would have come to the same conclusion, which still doesn't tell him anything about how mortals' hearts and minds work. He's only learned that mortals are good at complicating simple stuff. It's a terrible trait, one that you saw lead 2 sisters to run away from you and die when you and the others first reached Garlemald. Omega saw similar self-destructive behavior when his people were conquering planets, so he thinks seeing the graves might help him understand the why behind those actions. You're not the first ones to arrive at the graves. A soldier from the 1st Legion named Aeneas is there. He's one of Julius's men who you met before, and a prime target for Omega's questioning. What the man thinks is a weird Magitech communicator wants to know why he's there, and he doesn't really have a reason. Alphino and Alice told him the story of what happened to the sisters, so he came to visit their graves to pay his respects. The twins still feel bad about the deaths, but the Garleans don't blame them, especially not since they were tricked into starting a civil war and killing a lot of their own people anyway. It's kind of hard to judge other people's mistakes when you're busy trying to take accountability for your own. Omega doesn't see the two things as similar at all, and from a logical standpoint, he's right. If you steal a car and your neighbor steals your TV, the fact that you're a thief too doesn't change the fact that your neighbor still owes you a new television. But from a moral standpoint, you're both pieces of crap. Omega doesn't think morals have anything to do with why the Garleans aren't attacking the Ilzabar contingent. It's either because they don't have an army large enough to win if they do try to fight, or their emotions are interfering with their logic. He wants Maneas to tell him which one it is. It's true that the Garleans are militarily outmatched, but that's not why they aren't fighting. Surviving is more important than holding a grudge. In other words, revenge is important, but not as important as food. But the people are of two minds about everything, even the way Lord Quintus decided to opt out instead of being captured. Some think he abandoned them to the enemy, while others think that he freed them so they could make their own choices. What they believe doesn't really matter, because in the end they still have to move forward. So it's better to save your energy for what's important, and if that means working with the contingent, he's fine with that. Plus, he likes the twins, which is natural. The twins are hard not to like, at least once you get past A Realm Reborn. Alphinaud sucked in A Realm Reborn. Omega actually understands Maneas a bit, and he's starting to realize that he may have been working the heart problem from the wrong angle. It wasn't the mortals who control their thoughts and emotions for power. Their emotions are so out of control that they basically use your body as a puppet and drive you around. That's also why studying mortals hasn't done anything but confuse him. So for his third field of study, he wants to examine something more in tune with the ancients than mortals. And for that, he wants to see the Loporrits, also known as the Moon Bunnies, so it's time for a trip to the moon. A study of the ancient machines on the moon base could help him get a feel for the ancients and their civilization, but he doesn't have the tools to get into the computers with this new body, so he needs a bit of help. Growing Way just so happens to see the three of you, and he runs up to say hi, but when he sees Alpha and all of the Chocobo's fluffiness, he gets depressed by the fact that the Loporrits have officially been out-fluffed. But when he hears that you want to study their inventions, that means you haven't replaced them with a much fluffier creature. So he's more than happy to take Omega around to see whatever he wants while you wait. Alpha and Omega come back without the bunny because after Omega's 50th question, the Moon Bunny had stopped paying attention. Omega had seen enough to figure out the rest on his own, so he let the Loporrit go. From what he learned, he labels the ancients as a level 4 civilization, which means two very important things. The first is that there's a system for ranking different civilizations in the universe, and the second is the fact that Omega casually labeled the ancients as a level 4 civilization means their ranking isn't all that special, and there are other planets out there with creatures of the same power and intellect as unsundered Ascians. Regardless, their status didn't rid them of their flaws that caused them to be self-destructive, but studying them should tell Omega more about why his own leader went the same route as so many other worlds. Which means he wants to talk to the Watcher, but instead of teleporting, he wants to ride Argus. Vanna's dog refuses to let them ride it, and Omega assumes that it has something to do with Growing Way's fluffy level. Because the Moon Rabbit is an idiot, the genius robot Omega thinks that there's a fluff-based hierarchy where the fluffiest creature rules. Argus clearly thinks you're all stupid, but he gives you a ride to the Watcher, who is happy to have so many visitors. But it turns out that the person best suited to answer Omega's questions about the ancients is you, since you spent so much time with them on Elpis. It turns out that the person who the Watcher was modeled after was a scholar at the Annider during the time that you went to the past, and he was a close friend of Vanna. He remembers joining her group during the final days, but he can't remember much about the event, which was likely something that Vanna did on purpose so he couldn't influence the newly created people of the Sundered World. But he still remembers how sad he felt when Vanna became Hydaelyn's heart, because she'd never be able to live among the people she cared about again. But her friend wouldn't abandon her even then, and she must have heard him, which is why she restored him in some way as the Watcher, similar to how Emmett Selk recreated Hythodeus. And all of her plans were successful because of you. After hearing the story of your time on Elpis, Omega can't understand how you look at Vanna as a hero. What she did led to the end of the final days, but she did severe damage to the world and its people in the process. And she left Emmett Selk and the other Unsundered, her friends or at least her associates, in a miserable state for thousands of years. Even Hermes needs to be mentioned, because if he hadn't tested mankind, they never would have become strong enough to do what was necessary. He's similar to the Omicrons who first started turning their bodies into machines to grow stronger. The first attempts were bad, but they led to the successful ones later on. And even though Emmett Selk tried to destroy your world to restore his, he was working towards saving his people, which makes Omega wonder, was he the hero or the villain? The true answer is they were all heroes and villains depending on where you stood, and that gray area is what has been hard for Omega to understand, but he's starting to get it, slowly. No two people are the same. There's no way to determine what choices people will make, even if they're put in the same situation, so no amount of studying will allow anyone to accurately map human emotions. But it's not the same for the Omicrons. They all follow the same logic pathways, and should all come to the same conclusions no matter the situation. At least that's what it's supposed to be. Yet Omega still doesn't know what led their leader to the final decision that destroyed their world. So he's going to continue putting all the data together and try to figure it out from there. But for now, this little trip is over, so it's back to Labyrinthos you all go. You all make it back at the perfect time as usual. Something's come up and Biggs and Wedge have to go help Jesse with a job that got messed up. Their airship's already arrived, so they want to talk to Omega on the way. Since you helped him out with his investigation, Omega's come to a conclusion. He labels your heart and emotions as a phenomenon, one that influences the individual's perception of reality, which is actually a very good definition. Since you helped out, he's willing to translate the message, but even more important than that, he's come to the conclusion that the Omicron's leader didn't make a logical decision after meeting Medion. He acted off of his feelings and decided that it was for the best if all Omicrons stopped functioning, which means whether they become machines or not, deep down the Omicron can feel things too. As for the message, it's nothing special. It simply says in so many words to keep pushing forward and hopefully all of your days are happy ones. Simple or not, it makes you all smile. The fact that he still can't understand why something so small had such a massive effect on your emotional state, Omega's determined to continue his search until he figures that out, and why his leader decided that the Omicrons would have been better off dead, meaning that his journey with Alpha is far from over. This concludes the story of Omega Beyond the Rift. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe, join the Discord, ding that notification bell, and if you really want to show your support, you can donate to the channel through the link in the description. Until next time, guys. Later.